Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to call this meeting to order. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We have a nice turnout here in the gallery. We're going to turn straight to our first order of business, which I want to introduce the urban partners to everybody. At this time, if we want to have Christopher Lankino and Jim Hartling come to the table. They are the consultants we hired recently with Urban Partners. We just came from a very productive, a little over an hour and a half meeting with the project implementation partners. Not the entire 6 folks that were mentioned recently in the press release, but 3 of them were there today. We hope the whole team will be there at the next meeting. So I'm just going to turn it right over to them to take it from here.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon. We're very pleased to be here. Can everyone hear me? I don't know if this microphone works. Our firm has been in business for 33 years, and the kind of project that we've been asked to tackle with you, which is one that is really aimed at implementation based on economic reality, is the kind of project that we prefer to undertake because it's the one that's most likely to lead to some action in the near term. And we like to see results, I think would be the best way to say it. Let me talk a little bit about our firm, and I understand, let's see, there may be a delay on this. This button, okay. Okay, so talk quickly about the team we put together for this project. It's our firm and a firm, Brown and Keener RBA Group. They were Brown and Keener, and then they merged into RBA Group, so we were stuck with this long name for them. We've been in business, as I said, for 33 years. We're doing market analysis, the consensus building to try to prioritize the catalytic projects in for your implementation program, doing the pro forma and cost-benefit analysis, coming up with the implementation strategy, and managing the project. Brown and Keener RBA will be supporting us by analyzing physical conditions and public infrastructure, exploring the linkages to the surrounding neighborhoods from the downtown, and creating illustrative plans and some renderings so that people have some vision of the perhaps more wordy ideas that we come up with. We've been around, as I said, since 1980. Our predominant focus is on implementation of development projects. We do market analysis, site development strategies. You will be our 82nd downtown that we've worked in. We've worked in over 100 neighborhood commercial districts. We do economic and fiscal impact and project financing analysis, and again, consensus building among project stakeholders. We've also, in the past, we're not doing it these days, but in the past we've acted as a developer, usually for nonprofit organizations. We've built 380 units of affordable housing. We've done 500,000 square feet of commercial space, a senior citizen center, and a farmer's market. So we've had some experience. I think the relevant thing for you is because we've acted in that role, we're able to really think through in detail what it takes to carry out activities and what it takes for you to encourage the private sector to carry out activities. Some of our relevant experience, we've had 3,000 projects, so we're just picking a few here, but some we thought were relevant. Girard Avenue in Philadelphia is a commercial street that runs for 4 miles through north part of Philadelphia. This acted for decades as a barrier between the more affluent center city and the impoverished North Philadelphia. And about 10 years ago, we started working on a project to translate it into a main street that would bridge the gap and begin to stimulate investment north of Girard Avenue. 37 different neighborhood groups were involved, including one that Chris served on the board of for a while, and another one he's now on the board of, although not at that point. Among the things that we focused on for targeted projects along this 4-mile district were assembling a site and doing financing for a new grocery store, which has been built, focusing retail and restaurant development at certain nodes that were supported by transit, and undertaking some targeted infrastructure upgrades that made it more friendly to cross the street between the neighborhoods rather than have the street act as a barrier. And Brown and Keener worked with us on that project. One of the projects that I have to talk about a lot because my longest standing associate got roped onto the planning commission in this town after we did this work, is downtown Swarthmore at Swarthmore College. There we did a strategy for their really beautiful downtown that started off with the premise, don't screw things up, and has ended up with, I think, a 12-element strategy, and they are now implementing the last one of those. So they have done all 12 projects. We get to put a big check on this one. But it was anchored around relocating and modernizing an anchor grocery store that is owned by the community in the downtown. Sort of expanding the diversity and the size of the commercial town center, improving traffic circulation, and enhancing their historic fabric. The last project which is being constructed is an inn for Swarthmore College, which is going under construction now. I think an important thing about Swarthmore is that you really have to be sensitive to input from the community and really understand and listen to stakeholders. There are 6,000 people in Swarthmore, including the students, and I personally had discussions with 900 of them in the course of doing this in small groups and individuals. We're not promising to talk to 900 people here in Hagerstown, but we understand that you need to have a lot of input, especially if you're going to get consensus around action. Asbury Park is another place we've worked in off and on over the years. It was an extremely poor city and was an area where the county tended to locate most of their social service functions, which created some real concentrations of poverty within the community. But they had assets. They had Bruce Springsteen. They had the ocean. And they had a rail line to New York. And in our most recent work there, we did a transit-oriented development plan for their Main Street, which you see illustrated up above, and that involves rebuilding the parking lot in their city hall into a mixed-use development right at the train station, and they're in the process of hunting for a developer right now. We unfortunately rolled this plan out in 2009, which wasn't the best moment to try to find a developer with financing, but they're pursuing this project right now, as well as doing improvements to the street and other investments. There's been some major improvements in Asbury Park since we started working there. Montclair, New Jersey is another town. It's a community where we worked in the downtown. There was a long-standing vacant department store. That site that you see in front of you in the picture there is the redevelopment of that into a mixed-use project. They also built a parking deck. They've done streetscape enhancements and created a historic district. And they let us back in town to do another project last year, so they must not think we're the worst people around. Erie, we've been working in 2006. Since 2006, there we've been working mostly with institutional anchors, an insurance company, Erie Insurance, college, medical center, and trying to really move beyond very localized development around elements of their downtown to create a community. And the most important things that are going on now has been a number of market rate housing units developed that are beginning to convert what is a downtown that people visit into a downtown where people live. And we think that was an important element there. Savannah is a place we've worked in since 1984. They'll let us work there for a decade or so, and then they throw us out for a while, and then they bring us back. Most recently, we've been working on their downtown plan, and during the 8 years we worked there until 2 years ago, we encouraged them to create more hotel sites, and they've increased their hotel occupancy downtown 46% in those 8 years, which has enabled them to take the wonderful assets that they have and extend them to an ever-growing tourist base, which has increased demand for restaurants and improved their the amenities available to the residents. One crucial thing that is often people don't tend to focus on because it's not physical is there in the late 80s we created something called the Small Business Assistance Corporation, which they have now run since 1989. And it provides technical assistance and loans to small businesses, many of whom have become the tenants that have occupied the redone storefronts on Broughton Street, which is their main street. And sometimes the important things are programmatic and not necessarily just specific pieces of real estate. In Philadelphia, we also did the Avenue of the Arts strategy 21 years ago. And as I was telling the mayor earlier, at the time we did this, they had me try to calculate how much investment we thought was going to happen, and I picked a number of $700 million when I threw a dart at the wall, and that was the number I hit. I assumed it was going to be cultural facility development, such as the Kimmel Center that you see up at the upper site there, but also office buildings. But the key strategy here was to attract suburbanites to come downtown and visit the arts and entertainment venues that were there and expand dining. Subsequent to that, we discovered that young people were smarter than we thought, and they preferred to live where they drink instead of living where they work. And so they moved downtown to the restaurants and the bars, and there's now been $1.3 billion in investment, and it's still counting, most of that in housing, caused by first younger people and then empty nesters choosing to live in the location where they went to arts and entertainment venues. So we think that's an important dynamic for a lot of cities. I didn't pick this out for what I'm going to say right now, but we worked on the Hoboken waterfront again 20 years ago. And what you see in the way of the rubble up on the left is what the Hoboken waterfront looked like at that point. It's 14 blocks. The city owned 4 of them. 2 mayors have been driven from office for agreeing to a scheme to build very large development on the pier that the city owned there. That was a plan proposed by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Yes, that's the let's have some traffic in Fort Lee Port Authority that we're talking about.
Also the World Trade Center.
And the World Trade Center and many other developments. But Hoboken residents did not want the level of development that was necessary as seen in the schemes by the planners for the Port Authority. So we got brought in after 2 mayors had been driven from office. The 3rd mayor would walk around the outside of the building we were meeting and checking to see if he was going to be thrown out or not. And we mediated between the pro-development and anti-development groups for 2 years, every 3rd Thursday night. And they finally agreed to scheme 8B version 7, 4B version 7. I have to be careful here. And the key idea in that was don't build on the pier. Instead, turn it into a park that you see there. Because if you don't build on the pier, all of that development value will translate to the 3 adjacent blocks, and you'd only have to build a third as high to get the same development. And all of that has been built out now. Their tax base grew 32% in the first decade. So we think of that as a great success. So, what you're getting from us is our experience in organizing development and implementation strategies. That's our core business. We think we've run across just about every possible issue that can affect an urban commercial district, and we've come up with solutions to most of them, not all of them. We understand development economics in great detail, and we really have experience with a broad array of catalytic interventions which could be appropriate for your needs here in Hagerstown. Our strategies include big things and little things. They include projects and programs. So some of the activities that we come up with here, some of the suggestions, may involve a specific site or a specific project. Others may involve a programmatic change that can support improvements to multiple properties, or even ones that are aimed at improving your attractiveness to certain businesses. So I'm not going to prejudge what the nature or character of the project's activities we're going to come up with. The team that you have here, we've worked together for 21 years, our 2 firms, and so we know how to work together and work together efficiently. And we get things done, and we expect that we'll get some things done here in Hagerstown. So how are we going to tackle this? Well, we had our project start meeting 2 hours ago. We're going to do market analysis and physical analysis over the next few weeks and generate a summary report. We're then going to look at what are the sort of options for key catalytic activities. Your RFP asked us to identify about 8. We usually find when we try to do 8, we end up with 10, but we're going to try to do 8.
We'll take 10.
Well, but you got to figure out how to make them all work.
Sure.
We're going to work through those with the committee. We're going to work through them through public input workshops. We're going to talk to a great number of stakeholders. Then we're going to prioritize those, come up with the key list of those that we think can have the most impact for your community, and then figure out how they work, analyze them in detail, their economics, their sites, if they're site specific, what their fiscal impact will be for you. Refine that, generate a plan, and have that plan reviewed by you, by the project committee, and in a public forum. So that's our basic project approach here, and we're going to run through all that by the end of June, which means we're up and running hard at this point. So we are very appreciative to be here. We have been excited by the input we've already had from your very competent staff, and we expect to be working hard over the next several weeks and months. If there are any questions or things you'd like to talk about?
I just want to open it up before we open it up for council questions and comments. I want you to address the project committee that we announced who, just started meeting a couple hours ago.
Mm-hmm.
And because you gave us some specific direction in terms of
Right.
who you would like to see, the kinds of people on that particular aspect of this process.
What we were interested in is having input from people who can tell us the reality of the economics of doing various kinds of projects here. I think we're preparing a plan. We're not really preparing a plan. We're preparing an action implementation schedule. You have already completed your sustainability plan. The policies, the approaches, the priorities as they affect public policy have already been set. What our charge is to find those important elements within this that can be implemented and can be implemented in real time to have the maximum possible impact. And therefore, we want input early and quickly about the realities of the economics. This is a project committee. It is not a committee that is a decision-making committee. It's a committee that's providing advice to us in order that we're able to quickly get to accurate assessment of those projects that can have the most impact, and to understand exactly what kinds of efforts are going to be necessary on both the public and the private side to make them happen. And if they're too extraordinary, we want to know that so that we don't waste your time picking projects to focus on that will not happen. Is that?
Thank you. I'll open it up to the council for questions, comments.
Well, let me make just a comment. First, we're appreciative of the fact that you're interested in Hagerstown and that you're here. And if you can bring all the best features that we just saw on the screen a few minutes ago to Hagerstown, or something along those lines, we would really appreciate it.
I think we have to lower expectations here. We try to find the most effective and doable elements that fit your specific circumstances. There's no cookie cutters in this business.
Doable is what we want. But I just wanted to say something about the project committee members. You probably haven't had a chance to meet all of them yet.
No.
These are outstanding, fine people. The mayor has done a great job of selecting these people. These people have been in this community mostly for a very long time. They've accomplished things in this community. They know the problems of trying to accomplish things in this community, and they know the attitudes of the community as a whole. And you will not go wrong by working with these people. They are terrific. And they're here as part of this committee because their heart's in this. So you'll enjoy working with them.
I appreciate that. Unfortunately, they're discovering that we have a few opinions also as we have these discussions. So
Well, I think
there's a little give and take here.
Well, and the valuable thing about the feedback that you give us is, you can look at us and say, that's not going to work. Or in our experience, those kinds of things have, fallen by the wayside or failed. So I think, that's part of being data-driven and reality-based.
Yes.
Is that, we're asked all the time, what's your vision for the city? Well, it doesn't matter what my vision is. It doesn't matter what Don's or Penny's. It's about what kind of shared vision we can put together through this process that will actually lead to things being done. And that's, I think, ultimately what we're trying to accomplish.
Although
with
I
this.
should say it is always the role of people in our position to push people's aspirations perhaps a little beyond the mundane that they might do without a push. So we're also trying to say, can we go a little further?
Any other comments, questions?
Well, I'll say that I have a lot of experience with consultants, and I've had 2 lengthy and detailed sessions with this group. I want to commend staff for selecting them, the council for approving it, and I have been impressed. I've been impressed by the feedback, the judgment, and and I hope and I think it will lead to effectiveness. Whether there will be a magic transformation, I think we all know that that's up in the air. I think we'll all work hard for it, but and the other thing I'm impressed with is they're not afraid to say I think there's another way to look at what you're saying. I think that there's that may not work, that will not work, because we've done it here, here, and here, or we've seen this here. And I've encouraged that kind of feedback because I think that's where we get value. We need to, find what will work and then build on that. And so far, I think I've been impressed, and it's been a pleasure working with this group.
So day 1 is successful so far. I think.
Right. Well, I'm trying to set the aspirations even higher than your level there. But,
It's pretty clear from looking at the breadth and I think care in the sustainability plan that you're having us work from, that your community has a good sense of what needs to be done and what the possibilities are. It's really a question of saying, how do we find those elements within this that it's worth investing in first and that will get you the furthest along the path so that the others will be easier. And I think that's the objective here.
And the idea is that it, again, is going to take public and private
Yes.
partnerships and investment to make this achievable.
Yes, that's always the case, I'm afraid.
Any other? Yes, Mr. Alshire.
First, let me say that I don't have any illusion that you will not be able to accomplish the task which you purport that you are able to, based on the examples that you have given. And it was interesting in a number of the examples that you cite things like housing as a huge or significant element of any one of these plans. I find it odd that I don't think any one of the project committee members is heavily versed in the housing dynamics that we experience here in our urban core. With that said, while I certainly respect the notion that the committee needs to be made up of a membership of individuals that have the ability to represent the realities of what may or may not be able to be accomplished as part of this effort. Because I've not had the ability to express these opinions before our meeting here today, and they really have little to do with your task, but rather focused on the committee establishment, I would note for the members of Mayor and Council sitting here that we have processes in which we are prescribed to abide by when we establish boards and commissions and committees. And they are clearly spelled out in our charter and in our city code. and I have the fullest expectation that we will follow the parameters of those that are spelled out within our charter and our code as it applies to this committee, this ad hoc committee, or any other. And one of the primary elements, and rightly so, is that this body have a discussion on establishment of such committees, its membership and its makeup as required by our charter and our code before we institute and appoint those members. And I fully expect that within the next couple meetings that that's going to occur. If it's not, then I have some serious questions about our ability to follow those parameters and also about the requirements of any members of our boards, our commissions, and our ad hoc committees to file the appropriate paperwork for non-disclosure that we require of all of those appointed members as part of this effort or any other.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking for.
This council is required within the code and the charter, when it appoints a committee, to do so by the appointment of the mayor and by a vote or consensus of the council. We haven't had that conversation. And when that committee is established, any board, commission, or ad hoc committee is established, they are required to comply with those non-disclosure requirements within our ordinance, the ordinance we adopt, I believe, less than a year ago. And it's my expectation that that's going to occur. If it's not...
Are you objecting to the way in which these project committee members were appointed? Is that? I'm just trying to understand.
I'm objecting to the fact that we didn't have a single conversation about it. That we now have established a committee to carry out duties on behalf of this body as part of this effort without prescribing to the parameters in which we set those up within our code and our charter. If we're not going to do that, then I think it raises questions about all these other boards and commissions and committees that we require to go through that same process and subscribe to those same forms of disclosure that we're not requiring in this effort. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to point out the very fact that when we refer to these committee members, and I understand the reasoning for so, but when we refer to them as implementation partners, and we subscribe to specific catalytic projects in which some of these very members own property, abut property, or are going to play a significant role in the potential benefits of those projects. Projects I'm not opposed to, but projects that they may see some benefit from, then we should be especially assured of following the parameters in which those committees are established. And if we're not going to do that, then I think it raises some serious questions that will be left unresolved.
My recollection of when we awarded this contract to Urban Partners was that the council was in agreement that I would be appointing these members of this project committee. If I'm not recollecting that properly, then, and I think we do need to get clarification in terms of reporting the issue that you're bringing up for
I agree.
Disclosure forms. We need to get clarification whether this constitutes a city committee.
I totally agree.
And I agree with both Mayor and Kristen. I think we need to get an opinion from our council, and assuming Kristen is right, then I would recommend we hold an executive session. It's a personnel issue to discuss names and of that nature. It's interesting. I think the word committee versus individuals that this group is going to talk to is probably the relevant words. That's my guess.
Right, these are not people in a decision-making capacity.
Well,
Neither
it
are a lot of our other
sounds
boards and
like
commissions.
they're an advisory board, is what it sounds like. And if that's the case, I suspect Kristen may be right that we need the council to agree to it. I'd never heard this before, about 30 seconds before the meeting started, and it made sense just like the Bicycle Advisory Committee does not make decisions, and many of them don't, of our committees. If it's actually an ad hoc committee, then I think but I'm certainly not giving that advice, Mayor. I would like to hear from our attorney whether that needs to be done or not.
Slightly perplexed at the issue being raised because Councilmember Alshire, in his sharing of his vision, the 5-point outline that he's likes to share with folks, he says quite clearly that the mayor should be empowered or emboldened or whatever verb he uses to bring people to the table, to bring these kinds of projects to bear. And so I'm confused at the questions being raised about the process now.
My suspicion is that, and my recommendation first is that we get an opinion from our city attorney, and my suspicion is if that opinion is consistent with Councilmember Alshire's, I suspect we won't have any problem getting the very committee that you desire. I think it's a matter of but I do think under state law that, assuming Kristen's right, I do think you have the ethics issue, that those ethics forms have to be filled out. And I think there are two issues here. One is, do those ethic forms have to be filled out? And two, do you need the consent of council? And I think under any circumstance, if you do, we can clean that up and get consent of council and get the forms filled out.
Moving forward, I hope, other than the word funding in this community, there are two magic words which we would all appreciate if you didn't forget, and they're called Maryland Theater. So you probably heard about that several times already.
It's on our list already, yes.
Okay, good.
Let me also say that we hope very shortly to be able to meet with all the members of council to hear your specific concerns also as part of our stakeholder engagement process, so that we really, as quickly as possible, hear all of the issues of concern, excuse me, and priorities that you had in mind in adopting your original sustainability plan and what you wanted to see occur if they could as priorities. So we will be trying to set up, I understand that your administrative assistant is prepared to help us to set up meetings with each of you so that we can try to get the input.
Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute, one more. Did you imply that you know Bruce Springsteen?
I have a rather sensitive issue in many of our plans. I don't want to go too far afield, but we did the plan for downtown Durham many years ago at the same time that the Bull Durham movie came out. And one of the problems, there were two problems in Durham. The first was that lovely Durham athletic field where the ballpark with the bull and everything had no parking, and it was very successful, and the neighbors were irate. But the second was that Durham desperately wanted a AAA team because Raleigh was getting ready to get a AA team, and they had to beat them. So in our plan for that, we ended up with building a new stadium in Durham and knocking down Durham Athletic Field, for which I feel I need some kind of dispensation from the baseball gods. Subsequent to that, in Asbury Park, I had to deal with the Stone Pony. And my brother-in-law happens to be recognized as one of the better guitar players in the South, and I had to get dispensation from him to put the demolition of the Stone Pony in the plan. So there don't have Bruce Springsteen, but I do have guilt related to the
Well,
these
I thought
issues.
maybe you could get him here for a fundraiser for the Maryland Theater.
No, I don't think so. I could probably get my brother-in-law if you want to, but he's not quite as famous.
We can work that out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions about the process, the product?
No, I only have one comment. I'd like to know if there were additional names that were looked at for the committee and the names that were thrown out. I'd like to see that.
well, we didn't throw any names out. We did invite one person who declined because he was too busy. But please, everybody, keep in mind, the members of this committee, the 6 developers, bankers, real estate folks, are just one aspect of a whole array of community outreach in terms. So I have a list of over 80
I know
people
that.
who are
Okay,
going to be interviewed.
I'm personally not happy with 3, and that's why I'd like to see what other names were thrown into that hat. All right? That's all.
Not a problem. Anyone else?
We look forward to working with you
Thank
all.
you.
We
We look
do.
forward to working with you also. It's an exciting project for us.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Next item of business is a Maryland Theater funding request. So I'm going to ask the folks from the Maryland Theater to come up. Benito Vetalana and Jessica Green from the Maryland Theater.
They're bringing Bruce Springsteen, I think, right?
For free.
I wish I could sign that
That's
contract.
one of our issues, isn't it?
Well, Mayor, Council, first, it's always a pleasure again to come down and talk about the Maryland Theater.
Pull that mic a little
sure.
closer, will you?
Sure. First of all, I'm always thankful to be able to have a chance to come and share before the city and the council about activities about the Maryland Theater. And I'm joined here with Jessica Green, our operations manager, who just has been incredible for the last couple of years working with us, keeping the theater moving forward. Today's meeting is really about a follow-up of a talk about we had back in September. And there are a number of issues brought up, and we told you we'd come back at some point with more clarity on the projects, the infrastructure. And as you know, the news brought to a lot of attention the immediate need we had in the theater with the ceiling. Unlike other theaters maybe outside of Hagerstown, we were very fortunate that no one was injured. We were also very fortunate that Jessica was engaged with some incredible groups of people that came to the Maryland Theater prior to that incident to prepare thinking about their infrastructure, the ceiling repair. And so we actually were able to move pretty quickly on that, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. I'm joined here today also to, the theater, the board, I work with a great board, very active, very involved, great staff, and incredible volunteers. We're also joined here today by a wonderful group of community partners in the arts community. The last couple of years, the theater's endeavored to become a community theater partner, more involved in the business of other groups in the theater that's work at theater, and we really believe local arts first has been our motto, and I think that has been our success, whether it be working with the MSO, community concerts, Barbara Ingram School for the Arts, and other local community groups. Okay, how do
Aaron, you want to guide us?
maybe that? I pushed the button, it worked, okay. So today I really want to talk about really an update to the council on 24-month capital infrastructure program underway. We have 4 specific projects that are underway, but also the ones that we have some proposals for that we'd like to move forward. And today is really about maybe working on a plan forward to seek some financial support for the capital improvements of the theater. We're going to talk also about working with other organizations like the county and the state here later in the presentation. Quick snapshot, not going too deep because we did this before. Really, we're 32 months into restructuring the theater. The one good story I really want to point out here is that working together as a board and Jessica, the theater has moved into a very good positive cash flow. We are a self-sustaining business operation. The program supports the theater operations. One thing I could jump all the way down to the bottom is the greatest challenge is an aging building and infrastructure. And I kind of thought about other directors in the past, other executive directors, boards that have run the theater. And this, looking back, this has been the most significant part that has challenged any board at the Maryland Theater. It's an aging facility that always presents problems. So every time we feel like we're building a good cash flow and we're ahead of the game, something creeps up and hits us with an expense that we had not seen. So that's one of the greatest challenges we have as a board, and I think as a community, talking together, the arts community, because so many depend on the Maryland Theater as a venue to present itself to the community. Really, other than that, our business has begun to really get deeper, and as far as presentations, I just wanted to point to Jessica for a second. She's been a significant part of working with a performance committee to bring better entertainment to the theater and plan out in the year for it. So maybe I can turn to her for a second. She could talk just as an example of some of those shows.
Well, first and foremost, really what the performance committee has done is to help us design processes and put follow-up processes into place. So when we do have successful shows, we're able to create a relationship from there with the production company, with the promoter, and have them return to our area, whether it's with the same show or a different show, and to create those relationships and support them in the future years. So that was our biggest hurdle with the performance committee. That wasn't always the case, that those processes existed, and we were able to sustain relationships with promoters and agents and production companies. So that's the biggest improvement there as far as business practices. For 2014, we're very excited to have Straight No Chaser already booked and very near sold out. It's doing extremely well. In the first 2 days, we sold several hundred tickets. They're in May. They're on a Monday evening. Nobody would expect that to be a terrific night for a show, so we're excited about that. We're working with a promoter that has that had kind of put the Maryland Theater off his radar for 5 or 6 years, I guess. And he's come back and is willing to work with us again, and we're very close to confirming a date for Bill Cosby with him. So that would be very exciting. I don't know if any of you saw him on David Letterman last night. That was a great show. And so that's really the biggest thing, is securing and rebuilding relationships.
Yeah, and the results are our calendar is getting full. And the big thing is in the middle of the week when we're typically quiet, we're filling those evenings, and that's been our focus. That's Jessica's focus, working with the Performance Committee to really bring more people downtown throughout the week, other than just Friday, Saturday nights, and sometimes on a Sunday. I think the benefit is everyone in the community downtown will benefit. The community will come together downtown more, and that'll be wonderful. So we're doing a lot of work. Jessica has done a great job working with the Performance Committee and the board to seek out those relationships, repair them, and really engage in an active business discussion of moving out in the calendar year and having we envision a very nice broad calendar that people have in January that they can see throughout the year, a lot of presentations, and that's our goal. Moving forward is really a capital infrastructure projects, and as everyone knows, the ceiling presented itself right before the Christmas show. The initial estimate came out that we were getting early on was about $250,000. And as everyone knows, we were very fortunate and blessed to have the Hamilton Family Foundation come out and give us a donation of $250,000 that covered that initial estimate. But the one thing that the group working on the theater told us is as we get closer in the areas that they couldn't really inspect, they may uncover more areas of need, and that's beginning to present itself. So the project could run up to about $350,000 we're looking at. Right now, we're at $310. So we won't know until they get into those areas, but the project is two-phased. Most of the project could be covered during this first phase with what we've received so far.
Right. The first phase will consist of the balcony lobby area where the 2 restrooms are. The ceiling, the complete ceiling, including the ceiling above the balcony where the damage was already done and partially repaired, and the actual dome above the main portion of the auditorium, and then the walls in the balcony area. The second phase is below in the orchestra level, the walls underneath the balcony, and also in the box seats in the stairwells.
And perhaps, Jessica, could you speak of the group that's actually doing it, their reputation and their background?
Yes, Hales and Howell is out of Baltimore with their main location in England. I think many of you had the opportunity to hear our project manager last night speak to the Longmeadow Rotary Club. It was interesting. I've learned more about plaster than I ever will need to. But I feel extremely comfortable that they have our best interest at heart. They're internationally recognized not only for their plaster, but also their work in theaters. And they've taught us a bit about our theater that we wouldn't have known otherwise just because of their experience there. So we're very happy to have them.
So the project's ongoing and ready to be completed right before the first event for the MSO, for the show, right?
Yes, should be February 7th. They should pack up and be gone.
And we cite this as a critical need, obviously. The safety is paramount, being the first and foremost on our mind. The second project is, we also say as a critical need, and Jessica, more than anybody else, can probably talk about what she experiences on almost a weekly basis.
Daily.
Daily. Our boiler system is over 60 years old. It takes up probably a very large section of this room alone in the basement, and the HVAC system. Jessica, could you give a little bit of background what your experiences are with that?
When I arrived to the theater about 2 years ago, it took nearly 30 minutes for somebody to turn on the heat or the air conditioning. You had to go in so many different closets and basements areas. So we've improved that a bit with a new control system. But for the past 2 years, the theater has invested over $30,000 a year in HVAC service calls. And I think that's per calendar year, and I think for 2014, we're reaching about $5,000 already. I think they've been in there nearly every day since we reopened after the holidays, and that cold weather caused a freezing pipe and just more issues. And it's not just the actual auditorium. I mean, that's certainly the biggest concern, but we will not be able to turn on the air conditioning in the box office this spring. We just simply, it's not safe. It's not healthy for the employees. The unit there was originally installed to cover all of those 3 stories of apartment buildings, and it's way too large for the area we need it now, and it's just completely deteriorated. And that's pretty much the explanation of most of the units in the building, so in all 3 buildings. And they've caused leaks which have recently damaged part of the dressing rooms as well as the stage. So when I say it's a daily concern, it's just that even when we improve one area, the HVAC seems to come back and haunt us again. So the proposals that we've received, that it says $511,000, that does include the installation by the contractor that we work with, who does the preventative maintenance and everything and works with us on a daily or weekly basis. It also includes the cleaning of the existing ducts, which are for the most part we would reuse, and it also includes the design and the structural process that we would need to use to add a rooftop unit. So it's really the complete package, that number.
The third project we talked about earlier when we came in, Rich Daughters came in and helped us look at a study to totally replace the seating and repair the surface of the floor. And we have a good price now to that, to do everything throughout the areas. We would lose about 120 seats. Mm-hmm. The goal is to give people a little bit more room when they come in to sit, to be more comfortable. And I think that's all part of having a great experience at the event you're paying for a ticket. Right now, every day, the seats are breaking on 1,300 seats. They're ripped, torn, hard. They're just in the 70s they were purchased. So this is really an effort to restore that area, make it more comfortable for patrons to enjoy the experience. And the final thing is theatrical lighting. There's a necessary need to improve the lighting for some of the performances that come. So in general, what we look at for the 2014-15 project cost is about 1.5 plus million. To date, we received about $260,000, $250,000 being from the Hamilton Family Foundation. We've begun receiving donations from the community, which we really appreciate, and that is going directly to the cost of the projects, leaving a difference of about 1.275 million for us. The next slide really is to focus on how do we move forward. Right now, we've worked on private donations, and we're still receiving some of them, and those we've talked about. I'm going to talk to Jess, turn it over to Jessica now. She's going to talk about some of the things that she's been doing to raise other monies for these efforts.
In the past 2 years, the Maryland Theater has applied for over 25 different grant applications. Most recently, we've applied to the community organization for funding for the basement dressing rooms, which are deteriorating every time you walk downstairs to them. Much of the counter space and things are held up by 2x4s as opposed to actual cabinetry where we can welcome performing artists and our local youth to use the space safely as they perform. We're also working with the city and Andrew Sargent and Sarah Nelson on an Art Place grant that would assist us with the seating project, and several others with the local foundations and clubs that are able to help us in these critical areas. We've started the process with Delegate John Donahue so he can go forward and request a bond bill on our behalf. The goal is $750,000, to which we need to be prepared to offer a match. And so hopefully all these will come together at once.
And the other goal is we want to go ahead and meet with the county commissioners they've been very generous as well in the past, like the city. I believe, in my experience and others in the past, before I got to the board, the city and the county have come together to focus on the Maryland Theater. When we needed a roof, the city, the state, and the county came together to focus on that project. Some of the work we're doing today is now going inside the theater and fixing some of the damage that was as a result of that leaking roof. As a business, the theater has done, I think the board and Jessica and staff and the volunteers have done just about everything they could to bring the theater to a financial viable business model from a day-to-day operations. We're running healthy. We're very thankful for that. We're selective on what we bring in, how we bring in. But at this next stage, I think the theater's at a critical juncture to now move to that next 100 years. And I think that's where we're at today, is to work with the city and the county and the state to focus on this great asset. We're thankful that we can work with so many people in the community. It's where the community comes together, and that's why we wanted to at least present some specific expenses to each of these projects. And it's my hope that we can move forward, and by 2015, when we're 100 years old, we're not looking at these projects as something we need to do. The goal in 2015 is to focus on where we're headed in 2015 and beyond as a theater. And we won't have some of these issues that we've been dealing with for so many years. So my hope is to bring closure and maybe working with the mayor and others to kind of discuss those funding and matching opportunities maybe in the future. So I'm finished as much as what we want to, but we're open to questions.
Yes, first of all, I want to say about last night's presentation that the excellence and specialization of the firm that's been hired to do the plaster repairs is just amazing. And they're not doing the most expensive solution, by the way. It's amazing all the different solutions for plaster, and they're combining a bunch of techniques rather than doing the lathe and and all that stuff that's so expensive and lengthy. They're doing something that's going to work. It's going to serve your needs. And but there's a second thing I want to emphasize that they said. How good a job this community's done in maintaining that theater compared to what they've seen elsewhere. I'm not saying these improvements aren't needed, but we're so negative that Hagerstown is descended and all that. No, they congratulated us on keeping it where it can be restored for a reasonable amount of money. So with that, and again, so it's a real community asset at this point. Let's not lose it. So I guess just to make, so there's something on the table, and ordinarily I wouldn't, you know, I'm the one that always says, let's wait till we put everything together at budget time. But I think what's critical here is Delegate Donahue's attempt to get money from the state, and as I understand, he's going to go forward with this. So I think in this case, you know, the state will be making their decisions over the next 2 months. Could be you get it in pieces, but if you get a commitment to it, you can manage. So I'll put out on the table for discussion, and not trying to preempt anybody else, but I think we just need to have it on the table, that I think it works if we, and I was a little bit reluctant, but I see, you know, the money going to the state. When I subtract that, I get 500, you know, from the amount required on your portfolio here, I get 525,000. If the city puts in 260 to match your private contributions, and if the county, conditional on the county matching it, I'm going to say it, that would be conditional on the county match. I won't make it conditional on the state money. I would say we go down and say, we've raised this from the community, 260,000 grants. We've got more than your 750. That would be my approach, and I would suggest we fund it from a portion of the monies we've received for the Army Reserve Center. And again, it's a portion because I think the whole community needs to share in this. And as we've just heard, we're going to have downtown needs that far exceed, you know, that capacity and other capacities. So, you know, I think 260 from what we've is a reasonable thing. And if we get a commitment from the county soon, we can take that to Annapolis and say, here's what we've got. And as I read your thing, it also gets you through the HVAC repairs.
Absolutely.
And that's important. It gets you through the first critical things.
Right.
If Annapolis says wait or something goes on, you know, we can apply to the nice-to-have projects,
Absolutely.
which I don't disagree with. I think we should be refurbishing the whole thing. But, you know, it gets you there.
Right. That's why we
That's what I see.
appreciate it.
So we've got a proposal for 260 funded by
Well, 260 funded by that on the
sale of
condition
the
that we
Army
get a
Reserve.
county match, though. That's I want to make that.
So you're
Because
creating a challenge.
this needs to be a regional effort. We've got the private, we're matching that. You know, we need to match because, you know, our taxpayers pay for both. So
Thoughts on Mr. Brubaker's proposal, 260?
Oh, I have no problems with that, Mayor. I think the source of funds is appropriate, and I think our citizens need to understand that we made a decision when we sold the armory that the funds that we obtained from the armory would not go into everyday operations, would go into projects.
yeah, thanks.
I personally cannot think of a project that is more important to our downtown than the Maryland Theater. And it's been my position for at least the last couple of years, I know I've enunciated it to you and others, that it is time to stop piecemealing the Maryland Theater. That it is time to put it in the position for the next 100 years. And I think the seating is almost as important as everything else. Clearly, it's not a safety feature, and clearly it's not something that we can't continue without, but I would like to see the entire project done. I totally agree with the council member Brubaker. I would be shocked if there weren't at least 3 votes in the county commissioners to match that. And I would like to think that based upon the support that I'm aware of for this, that while it may be led by our delegate who represents the city, I sure would like to think our entire delegation would support such a bond bill.
One would hope. I do think that 260 could be just the beginning of, you know, I know that there are ongoing needs and there is a greater vision for the Maryland Theater as it relates to its neighbors, the Barbara Ingram School. So I think, you know, but this is, I think, a good way to start, and I think putting it down as a challenge to the rest of the community, the county commissioners, is also a nice way of framing it.
Well, and I think in the future, we'll need the same kind of, you know, private and local funding distributions as that if we move forward on other things. But I think right now we should make every attempt to get that state funding, even if it comes in pieces.
Certainly has my support.
And we need to thank the Hamiltons also.
Yeah, very much.
Their
Yes.
contribution has really moved this effort forward, and they're always, whether it was a, excuse me, a stadium downtown or anything else, there's always that component of government wanting to see private investment. And I commend the Hamiltons for doing that. I know their dad would be very happy.
Mayor, I would like to support Councilman's suggestion. It seems to me that there's another interest in addition to the theater per se, and that's the economic development issue in downtown Hagerstown. Clearly, the better the theater does, the more acts it has down there, the more public it draws into downtown Hagerstown, the better downtown Hagerstown is going to do. And that will be very beneficial to our efforts to rebuild downtown Hagerstown. And, you know, if I remember correctly, the county commissioners were willing to step up and support a previous project in downtown Hagerstown as long as it showed the economic development merits of that project. Now, there's no question in my mind that the refurbishment of the Maryland Theater is going to have a great deal of economic development. And I think, Lou, you're probably right that there are three people on that county commissioner group who would be willing to look at this as a downtown economic development project and help us move it forward.
When it's had a discussion with Don Bowman today, and he said anytime there's anything going on at the Maryland Theater, the cash register at Bulls and Bears is a lot hotter. And I would imagine it would go the same for a lot of the other downtown, especially the restaurant business. So I do think that there's a tie to economic development here as well. Other feedback? Mr. Alshire.
I think it's good that you laid out what we often don't get to see, and that is the difference when we've been presented, especially the Maryland Theater over the course I can remember, is the needs versus the wants. There's clearly discussion all the time about, taking it out to the street, and, this huge $11 million, cost or whatever the figure is at any one time. So I think it's important when you come in and you present, these aren't things we want to do. These are things we either need to do or we don't operate. And I think that that's important because the reality is, and the practicality, the logic is, this body nor the county, nor I think the community at large are going to let the place close down. I mean, that's just not an option. So if your option isn't that, then it has to be you do those things you need to do to make sure that it functions in a manner that brings benefit to it. I can recall, we did that on a very static level, when Pat was there, and it was a pretty static process where here was the one thing we did, and the piece I think that I felt was missing forever is, I think, something that you talked about this evening when you brought up Bill Cosby and watching him on Letterman, is we don't, or haven't in the past, at least for me, gotten a lot of feeling that the Maryland Theater is geared significantly toward bringing in that larger entertainment value. We've done a lot of community events and activities and functions and, on a very localized level, and I just feel like the last couple of years that the effort has really been geared toward bringing in the broader entertainment value, and I know some younger folks in the community talk about that, and I think you're hearing that message. So I think that we have to do something like this in order for that, for that crowd to occur and for that level of entertainment to happen. Otherwise, we stay in that static, and the status quo just hasn't panned out.
Well, I appreciate that. And one of the things we focus on is the process behind the scenes that is now in place to do just that. We have a business process that we feel the community would be proud of that's in operation every day to bring more performances to the table, and a very professional approach to doing it and structuring the year out in the future. So I think the community's going to see more and more of that. But we had to put in place a lot of fixes to get to there.
And I think that based on a lot of the pictures on the wall, that probably happened to a much larger degree before my time. But I definitely feel like there was this period where it was sort of, let's just get it through to some point of prosperity, and at this point, we need to invest in the infrastructure, or that point of prosperity isn't going to return.
Correct.
And just to respond to your comments about the much larger possible expansion in the future, and I know there are many community members that would love to see the theater restored back to the sidewalk where it was historically. But the goal right now was to really restore and preserve the existing facility, and so it's fully functioning, and I'm not holding my breath when the MSO drops their shell that they might not have heat this February before we make a large expansion, so.
Well, to get the ball rolling, would the mayor and council be comfortable with us adopting, or you adopting a motion on the 28th?
Yes.
Along the lines, as Councilmember Brubaker described, there'd be a contingency there. We'd identify the funding source, but then you've got a formal vote that they can use in their discussions with the state.
And I think given that the legislative session only lasts so long, and they always say get in sooner and sooner, you clearly have some consensus here. I would think we'd want to send that consensus on to the county commissioners so that they can have it built up before we take that formal vote, so that we can get it down to the state partners and say, hey, here's,
It would also be
Before we
nice.
go down to Annapolis even.
yeah,
Oh,
so,
yeah, it'd be
so we
nice to
see
get
that
the
20 days that we
coalition,
might
the whole
lose.
coalition together for the appropriate letters to our delegation and everybody else that needs to get it right before then. I think that'd be very appropriate.
The day in Annapolis is the 30th, so if we vote on the 28th, you're on record before the day
Right,
in
but
Annapolis.
what Kristen's saying, and I agree, is we got to communicate that there's a consensus on the council, that the vote's a formality at this point. I think we have that consensus.
And then if we can get it from the county, we get that.
Same thing.
Yeah, and then if we get it from the
Voice
county,
to
we
the
can
state.
really go to
Hopefully we'll get
Annapolis.
that immediately,
If we can
right.
get the county's commitment before that, then we can really go to Annapolis with a lot. And they love it down there when you can say private and, this much local. It's 700, we'll have 780,000 from private, if we put this together. To match, and we're asking less from them,
Well, I think we can move forward. We really appreciate the chance to speak with you today. It's always a pleasure to come down here and sharing the Maryland Theater, and you've been wonderful supporting every time I've been at the table, so thank you.
Well, before you leave, I was the one who said it is the jewel of the downtown.
Absolutely.
And keeping those doors open
Yeah.
is going to be a plus. I have
Absolutely.
fought and fought for that, and I'm glad to see now it's going to be happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully it'll all work.
Thank you.
It'll come together, because I still say that's going to be the draw. It is.
We treat it with great respect, the theater, the board, the staff, the volunteers, and everyone else that has served at the theater is part of that. So thank you.
Let me just say, I guess in conclusion, that some people will criticize the use of public money to support a quote-unquote private entity, but there is so much that the Maryland Theater does for the community, not only as an economic development engine in downtown, but just the fact that so much of the theater is used and you guys don't get paid for it, that people provide their services and they don't get paid for it, that it truly is a community entity. And so we thank you for all that you do for the community.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, and no one mentioned it, but we have very few opportunities to help education because it's a county function. But the fact is, the better shape the Maryland Theater is in, the better shape the School for the Arts is going to be in. So that's an important aspect too.
And we do I want to recognize the board members from the theater that are here, the Maryland Symphony Orchestra, principal of the Bargram Ingram School for the Arts Council. We have many folks here today who are here in support of this, so thank you all for being here.
It's a great partnership.
Indeed. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, while the next group's coming up, I had an opportunity to go down to the theater today. So my daughter's birthday's tomorrow, so I thought I'd do something worthwhile and take her in to see the theater while it's under repair. And it's fascinating. If you have a chance to see it, the whole second floor has scaffolding. I mean, the balcony has scaffolding. There are half a dozen rows or more missing, and there's a high lift sitting there that can go up 70 feet. It's really unusual, and it's worth going there and taking a minute to see it.
How do they get that thing in there? I'm going to go in, I guess. I mean, it's a big boom crane, and but they have it out on the theater floor, you know? Yeah. Yeah, I guess you're right. Thanks, Don, for reminding me. I want to go in and see that.
It's worth seeing, Marty.
Councilmember Don Munson was down this afternoon to look at the theater, and I just wanted to be sure that you all knew you were very welcome to stop in any time to see the plaster restoration in progress. It's fairly impressive, so.
Thank you.
Feel free
Thank
to
you.
stop in.
Did everyone hear that? You're all invited to come and see
See the boom crane.
The process.
Yeah, the boom crane.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the Police and Fire Employee Retirement Plan update. So we have our Human Resources Director, Karen Paulson, and I'll let you introduce the rest of our guests.
Yeah, we have quite a few guests this evening, joined by John Ketzner with CBIZ, also his associate, Matt Stuckey. They're based out of Cumberland. We also have Christopher Little and Lisa Loker from PNC Investment Services. They're based out of Baltimore. So we're very pleased they could be with us this evening.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about the Police and Fire Retirement Plan. It's a very important component of the total compensation package for our public safety personnel. But also before we do that, I do want to recognize the Police and Fire Committee, who does meet to review the investments to make sure everything is in line with the investment policy that we have. And some of those members are with us this evening. So I just wanted to take a moment to recognize and thank them for their service. So our goal this evening is to review the plan's position, performance, and discuss recommendations to ensure the long-term health and viability of the plan. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to John. There you go.
Do we have PowerPoint?
Oh, not, everyone has it in the packet.
Just work off hard copy? Okay. Well, thank you again. I think we've met before, and this presentation is the same template we've used before, just so we'll quickly burn through the main. But first thing I want to say is I am from Cumberland, and I come to the Maryland Theater a lot, and it's a great venue.
Well, thank you.
Good.
Thank
I
you.
wish we had something like that in
You're
Cumberland.
welcome anytime.
Thank you.
You're welcome
That's
many
lovely.
times.
All righty, so the city sponsors this defined benefit pension plan for its public safety employees. It is a classic pension plan. It's a program similar to Social Security in that it provides folks that retire a pension. They're paid monthly, and the amount of benefit that they get is based on a formula, and the formula is a function of their salary. Their average salaries are going out the door last 3 years, and or high three average salary, and then 2% a year for each year that they work for you. The maximum years of service that get credited for pension purposes is 30 years. You started this plan in 1998. And I'm sort of conflating the first two slides here, but basically you pulled out of the state program. You were in a much more modest plan for these folks under the state program, under a state program. You pulled out 1998, started your own program, and have been funding a more generous plan than that state plan was, and have sort of been catching up over that period of time. And unfortunately, of course, the capital markets decided to seriously misbehave over that same 15 or 16 year period. But basically, you are running a self-insured pension plan here. And so there are three sources of money to meet the promises that are made by this plan. One are the employee contributions. They're fixed at 7% of their pay. The second source are the investment returns, or is the investment returns that and PNC will be discussing that a little bit later. But you take this money, the money that you contribute goes into a trust fund. That trust is professionally managed and invested, and those investment returns are a very important component of funding this promise. And then the third component, and the catch-up, make it all up component, is the city's contribution. So what you do is you retain an actuary to come in once a year, take a look at the program, and recommend back to you for budgeting purposes a level of contribution to help meet your this promise to these folks. So again, that's pretty much the first couple of slides. If you go to slide 4, it's a summary of your current demographics. And again, what we do as actuaries is every July 1st, we take a look at who are in the plan at that point in time. We only consider for liability calculation purposes the folks that are actually working for you on each July 1st. And you can see as of 2013, your active employees were down to 159. You have 79 retirees. Vested are folks that have left the employ of the city but are due some level of benefits sometime in the future. They just have not gone into pay status yet. So you can see the actual head count, at least for the actives, is declining over the last couple of years. This is probably not a surprise to you. I believe you have a lot of unfilled positions and things like that. And that's, that can become problematic if it continues over time for funding a retirement plan. It's, it's that the risk pool is a big part of what we spread these costs over, and if that's declining, even if everything else is doing well, it can tend to make the cost as a percentage of pay go up. The basic average age of the group and the length of service hasn't changed much from last year, so at that level, it's a static group, and that's good. It's it's nice to keep those numbers about where they are and not have a group that's getting increasingly older. So that's the.
I have a question on that.
Sure, go ahead.
When you say that it is a closed plan, these numbers will continue to change, correct?
Right.
Okay. And when you say that the increase in retirees versus actives may become problematic, I'm trying to figure out if it is because, maybe it's both reasons, the pace at which new members are added, if that has any impact.
The pace and the basic sort of demographics of those new people can have. It's just, we've heard a lot about Obamacare, for example, over the last 6 months, and the problems with the delays and whatnot, and that they're not getting these new, younger people into that risk pool to help moderate the unit cost for everybody else.
Would it be as problematic if we weren't?
I don't want to. Go ahead.
If it were more fully funded by this point, would it be less problematic? In other words, I think we're at like
Yes.
43% or like 20.
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Right.
So the faster we bring that to whole, the less problematic it becomes.
Right, because you have fixed costs especially for the folks that have already retired. They
Right.
came along relatively late in their careers. They got the benefit of the improved plan,
Already accounted for.
and those liabilities are sort of legacy liabilities that are fixed in there and have to be paid off.
Okay.
Okay. So to the extent that you can pay those off, then your costs are going to be moderated as a continuing cost of payroll.
I would think what would affect it even more so would be the average length of service. If that was ever higher and higher, that would mean we're going to have a liability even sooner.
Right,
than-
sure. So if that group gets older.
Right.
And
So that gives
and-
us that much time to
Right.
fill the gap in
I mean,
terms
it's
of the
a-
funding of the plan.
I mentioned it's a self-insured program, but at the end of the day, it's a risk-bearing program like any other insurance program. And your pool is your pool. So to the extent that you can keep a good, healthy risk pool to spread these costs over, it makes the cost much more predictable and moderated. So anyway, again, we completed our evaluation this year, and again, from the liability side, we look at the folks that are in the plan now. We project to, we project through their careers, pay raises and the probability that they're going to turn over. And then when they retire, we build in life expectancies and things like that. And basically, our recommended level of contribution this year has increased from 12.2% to 13.5%. As a recommendation to the city of payroll. Now, again, I would point out to you that in fact your payroll, the covered payroll here has declined. So the absolute dollar amount isn't much difference in terms of recommended level contribution. It's just as expressed as a percentage of your current covered payroll, the folks that you now have working in this in this group. Is down, and in fact it's down 15% over the last couple years, and that is a part of the driver in terms of our recommended increasing the level of contribution as a percentage of payroll.
And John, just to be clear, that could be if someone retires and we're rehiring at a lower salary, that could affect it,
That's
vacant
part of it.
positions affect it.
Right, but you do have, I mean, we only concern ourselves with your active positions. We don't build into our modeling any vacant positions that you might have. Okay, so again, we're just looking at the folks that are in there, the assets that you currently have, and coming back to you with what we think is a good recommendation as a level of percentage of pay contribution for your next budget period. Sure.
So we lock in that percent, that we add people to the payroll. Does that just develop a bigger balance going into next year? We leave it locked in at 13.5%? We're hiring more people, that increases the base.
That could.
I mean, I realize it's a relatively small amount, but 13.5% also is a large number.
Right, and it, again, when you, the total cost of the plan went from 19.2% of pay to 20.5% of pay. When you look at the total cost increase, it's fairly modest, but your share of that is 100% of the increase. So your percent increase looks a little more exaggerated. But yeah, I mean, again, our job is to come back to you once a year and adjust our recommendation as a level percentage of pay as a contribution. And we're just saying that, the folks from PNC will be up here in a minute and are going to tell you you had a pretty good year in terms of investments for the period ending June 30th, and that's true. Our main concern is that declining payroll. And if you think of your costs, as you should, of this burden as a percentage of your covered payroll, then we're saying you probably need to pop that a little bit because for no other reason the payroll's going down.
Well, that could be a function of more people at the bottom of the pay ladder as well.
Right.
Yeah.
But your head count is down. You can see that from that previous slide. The next, funded status. The funded status did improve from last year to this year. In terms of percentage, it's up to about 47%, 46.5%. That's about a 2 or 3% increase off of a 2% increase off of last year's funding position. So it's inching up there. I know you folks would like it to be higher, but it's going to take time for it to work its way through, again, what's happened in the capital markets and the fact that you significantly increased these benefits 15 years ago. Okay, so the only way to make it lower is to write a check and put it in the plan. So that obviously moves money out of your balance sheet to do that. So you have to make the decision whether the aesthetics of this this funding level are troubling. I can tell you, anybody that's reading this, if they're savvy, they know what's going on. But you, in terms of this is a plan that hasn't been around all that long, and that this funded percentage needs to be seen in context. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I just, again, I was going to say my comments to the end, but maybe it's better when we're on the subject. I remember when I first came on the council and we had this briefing, and I was worried that it was at 39% and that we had to keep it going, and that was before the crash. So you know, this city, instead of, has tried to increasingly meet its obligations, and we've gradually increased that. And, you know, that would have been a place that would have been very tempting to take money from, and we have not. Instead, we're having ups and downs, but the overall trend line is up to meet what's a future liability, and you know, that we've got to cover. So,
I mean, this money is in trust, so once you put it into that trust
I
fund,
understand.
it's no longer available for.
right, but I'm saying if we didn't fund it at that status
No, I
and put it in the trust fund, then, you know, and that's been very tempting
Right.
since 2008 especially.
Right. You
And
have,
we have not done that, nor have we raised the employee share. So,
right. So, I mean, from our perspective, the plan has always been well-governed, especially given the period of time we've gone through since you pulled out of the state. The slide 7 and 8 are disclosures that are part of your financial statement disclosures, and Michelle likes for us, and Al before her likes to have this as part of the presentation, just so you can see how these numbers change from year to year.
Can I just ask a question about that? So I make sure I understand. The column on slide 8, under investment return, June 30th, 2013, the investment return is $1,800,000 and some odd dollars, and the benefits paid is about the same. So does that mean the benefits being paid is about what we're getting in terms of what our investment is bringing us?
Well, for this year.
Interest or whatever, right. So, okay.
Right.
It's not like, obviously, it's not like that every year, but,
well, look at the year before.
right, right.
So, yeah, I mean, you,
Be nice to have more coming in interest in those investments
right, I
than
mean,
paying out,
you
obviously.
have,
Yeah,
I mean, you actually had 3.4 coming
It's
in
that
from
trend
all
line.
sources.
It has to be a trend line.
1.8 going out in benefit payments this year. So it is, you did have net growth. The next couple slides, and I won't steal PNC's thunder, you know, we do take a look at the returns. Now, when we look at returns, your plan pays a lot of other fees besides, or I shouldn't say a lot, but pays fees besides simply the investment-related fees. So when we look at these returns, we look at them net of all fees that are paid by the plan, not just the investment-related fees. So you have, some years you have very substantial legal fees, for example, when you're changing plan documents and things like that.
So this is like a net investment return?
This is net of everything.
Okay, net.
So
Okay,
these will be slightly
good.
different than P and C's
Good.
numbers, but the difference is the additional fees that are paid by the plan that are not investment related. So, and again, P and C will put this into context for you in terms of, you know, the benchmarking and things like that, so I won't go over that. We talked about this last year. It's, you know, the accounting rules for this program are going to change here for the period beginning July 1st, 2014. Basically, up to this point in time, you've used the accounting rules as every other city and municipal or governmental agency that is subject to GASB accounting. Those accounting standards have been essentially the proxy for a funding policy. That the accountants say this is the expense that you should recognize in this period, that is an appropriate contribution. And the way that the old rules worked, it was okay as a template. I mean, as a proxy for a funding policy. But going forward, and GASB has been very clear about this, that these new rules are not designed to be a funding policy, so that you're going to need to sort of go offline and come up with a funding policy that's different than the accounting recognition number. And, you know, you can just go along essentially having your contributions determined, or your contribution recommendations determined as you've had them done in the past, and that'll be fine as a substitute for just using the accounting rules. So you are going to see different numbers plopping down in your financial statements because of these changes in the accounting rules. And again, you're just going to have to decide as a funding policy how much of that funded percentage you want to fund. You clearly are going to want to make sure you have enough contributions flowing in to maintain benefit payments. And it'll just be another sort of level of sophistication you have to bring to this process as you develop a funding policy, much like you have an investment policy. Okay, right now, our recommendation to you is, like I say, is 13.5% of payroll. And that clearly, as we sit here today and project that into the future, is sufficient to support the plan.
John, on that point, could you just clarify, did the committee approve that recommendation, or does this need to go back to the committee for their review and approval? How does that work in terms of the recommendation coming to the mayor and council? Has the report been reviewed by the committee?
I have no idea how you take, what mischief you get up to after we give you these reports, but.
So we would
yeah,
send this report back to the committee? Because you mentioned good governance over the years on the pension plan. It is a city pension plan.
Right.
So I just want to make sure, from our standpoint, we're clear on the recommendation on city
I mean,
funding.
our recommendation to both you and the committee is something that looks like 13.5% of pay, given where we are today. Okay. Again, just jumping up to our conclusions, again, I've touched on these. The investment returns were improved this year. I suspect that PNC will have be able to talk to you about what's happened since June 30th. My guess is that the plan has done pretty well since then. The demographics of the group remain stable, and we're still, it is a little bit higher, but the main driver for our suggestion that you increase that percentage of pay contribution is simply because the payroll was low. Our recommendations, again, this is a standing recommendation of ours, that you not do any benefit improvements. These things, it's very hard to make, if you improve the plan structure, give COLAs or whatever, it's hard to take those back out, and they become hardwired into plans and subject to constitutional issues. So again, we're sitting here today, we don't think you should seriously consider any significant benefit improvements. Getting back to my original point, that as we look at the plan's operation, we think it is compliant with this UMPERSA standard, which is the standard that was adopted by the state of Maryland, that essentially applies sort of an ERISA level fiduciarial measurement of governance to your plan. And again, from our professional point of view, you are compliant with that. And again, just what you've done all along, just continue to monitor the plan and put it into context with the rest of your financial obligations.
Thank you.
Okay,
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
before PNC comes up, I'm going to raise the same question I raised last year, which was this cost as a percent of payroll on page 5, and you note, the city is continues to absorb that increase, and the increase is suggested, to improve the condition of that percentage we're trying to grow to. But I think it's important for us to understand, if I'm going to be sitting here 3 years from now and that number is going to go from 13% to 18%, and how that impacts our ability to appropriately budget for the expectation that it was going to be, around 8%, which I don't think anybody agrees we're going to get down to again, but that we're not going to, reach triple what we, expected at some point.
Right, and part of it is just the basic aesthetic of reflecting these as a percentage of pay. Because again, we're reflecting this as a percentage of your current payroll, perhaps not the actual payroll that you would have if you'd been able to fill all these positions.
So then maybe my basic question to that is, there is the possibility that that number will fluctuate back down.
Right. If you were at your payroll was, where this covered payroll was 3 years ago, instead of 13.5%, we'd be recommending something more that looks like more like 11%.
Okay.
So that's, again, a big driver of that.
All right.
Because you need to, there are hard dollar amounts that you need to feed into this plan,
Right,
because
that
you
we
do
need to
have
meet.
these fixed legacy liabilities that need to be paid off. And
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't have any payroll at all, you still have a significant contribution, and it would be
Right.
an infinite percentage of payrolls.
Okay.
Any other questions or feedback? Thank you.
Thank you for the courtesy of your attention.
Thank you.
And again, this is Lisa Loker and Chris Loker from PNC Investments.
Welcome.
Hello, everyone. What I'd like to do, unless you all have another plan, is just give a brief overview of both the process of how we manage the pension plan and work with the investment committee, and also go into the performance a little bit. Sound okay?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Let's start on page 2 with the executive summary. I think it's really important to note that everything we do on the portfolio management side is guided by the investment policy statement for the plan. And that plan is reviewed at least annually in concert with the investment committee. And we make any recommendations we may have, any adjustments. If there's something that comes up in between, we certainly bring that to everyone's attention as well. We also work very closely with the Departments of Finance and Human Resources, and certainly the investment committee. This helps us make sure that all of our, we are aligned with your goals. We're all working towards the same objective. We meet at least quarterly throughout the year with the investment committee. And during those meetings, we're not just looking at the performance and the holdings. We're also making sure that we are in compliance with the investment guidelines. We're talking about any recommendations we might have. We even look at the cost effectiveness of the investments that we have in the portfolio. So it's a pretty thorough review, and your investment committee, I can tell you, is really on top of this. Going on to the plan itself, looking at the most recent fiscal year ended in June, as noted before, you had about a 12% return. The market value at the end of the fiscal year was about 16.7 million. Market value as of 12/31, just to bring you up to date a little bit, was right around 18 million. So good progress in the last 6 months of the year as well. The current targeted asset allocation is what we normally use for a balanced portfolio: 65% in equity, 32% in fixed income, and 3% in cash. It's important, I think, for you all to know that within that as well, there's a great deal of diversification. On the equity side, there's large cap, small cap, mid cap, international, as well as some REITs. In fixed income, we have exposure to not only core fixed income, but some exposure to high yield as well, which was the only positive fixed income sector in calendar 2013. So all in all, very well diversified, doing fairly well overall. Looking forward into next year, PNC thinks that the economy will continue to recover, maybe at a little more rapid pace than that of the past year. We do see several soft spots remaining. The main one of those, probably not surprisingly, unemployment. If people aren't working, they're not spending. If consumers are 2/3 of the economy, you see where the wheel continues to spin there. So we're hoping for a gradual reduction in unemployment, which is what we think is happening, but nothing super fast. Sort of slow and steady wins the race. What does that mean for this portfolio? We think we're pretty well positioned right now. We have a bias towards higher quality stocks, which this portfolio is rather heavily invested in, not only for their stability during any potential downturn, but also because of their dividend income. We do believe that interest rates will slowly creep upward. We're keeping an eye on that as far as the fixed income investments. That may mean at some point that we take a look at some non-traditional fixed income investments, global fixed income or absolute return fixed income. That would be the type of thing that we would discuss with the investment committee to see if it made sense for your risk parameters and for your investment policy. We do think stocks domestically are fairly valued right now, not overvalued, not undervalued, right where they should be. We are looking to international securities to sort of lead the way next year. The plan does have exposure in that area already, so I think you're pretty well set. And Chris, did you want to look at the performance? Unless there are any questions, we can move on to a more detailed performance review.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Well, turning to page 3, what we've done is we've set up just a very high-level review of the portfolio and investment summary, if you will. In the upper left corner, we've detailed for you the asset allocation that my colleague Lisa has alluded to in the prior page. You can see in that upper left corner that fixed income is about 30% of the portfolio, and equity is about 66% of the portfolio, and cash right about 5% as of June 30th, 2013. So along with what Lisa's comments were, in line with the policy, a little slight bias towards an underweighting towards fixed income and a little bias towards equity, mostly on valuation. Just to the right of that table, or that pie chart, if you will, is a table that shows investment returns. You could take a look at, we've broken that down between total portfolio against a benchmark, as well as equity against a broad domestic benchmark, and fixed income against its benchmark as well. We've put time periods out to the right-hand side. And if you will, with me, these returns are as of your fiscal year end, June 30th. And as John had mentioned, these are slightly different given that we look at just investment return and investment return net of its investment fees. So if there are further fees past that, we would not have, these and those. So you might see a little bit of a difference there. As John had noted, 2013, the plan returned approximately 12.1%. And moving out the columns, 12.3, 6.5. And then for fiscal year to date, as Lisa has alluded to, it's been a positive. First 5 months, that number is as of November 30th, up 9.4%. And happy to report, adding December into that time frame, we've actually seen that return go up about 2% additionally. So the return for the first 6 months of your fiscal year is 11%. So positive absolute returns, which we're excited about. Referencing a couple of individual categories there, equity has been the driver of that over the last 5 years. As you all familiar, and John made the reference to the credit crisis from 2007, 8, and 9. You also have a 15-year time frame that includes the technology bubble, if you will, is another period of difficult times. But over the last 5 years, the plan has returned 6.5% relative to a blended benchmark of all the asset classes that Lisa had referenced: REITs, large cap, small cap, international. All of those blended benchmarks together over the last 5 years returned 6.1. So that gives the impression that the portfolio performance is not only positive on an absolute basis, but also on a relative basis against different indexes. With that, I wanted to just point you to the lower table, which shows historical market values. And if you look at those market values from when PNC had began working with the city from 2004, I think the councilman who referenced the trend is your friend in the prior presentation, with the idea that you want to see that number moving in a direction, whether it be funding status or whether it be absolute level of return on a market value basis. This chart shows that for you. So you begin working with us when the plan was just over $8 million. Today the plan is double that and then some at $18 million. So we're pleased to report that to you as well. A couple of things I also wanted to reference were some comparative data points. When we look at the state of Maryland's return over the last 5 years, net of fees, and we're not sure all of those individual fees, but we assume net of investment fees, That return was 4% over that same 5-year time frame, ended June 30th, 2013. So comparatively, you can get a sense of how this plan is doing. And granted, as John has referenced, the risk profile of this portfolio just a little bit different than potentially the risk profile of the Maryland State Plan, given the beneficiaries, the employees that is, as well as the history or the length of time that this plan has been in place. But for a point of reference, that can give you some kind of guide. With that, I'll stop and take any questions on these 3 charts on this particular page, if the council or the mayor has any.
Anyone? Questions?
Yes, you mentioned fees, and I'm always concerned that in these kinds of presentations, you don't see fees. You know, I know you're giving it to us net of fees, but that doesn't tell us what those fees were.
Sure.
And you provided one point of comparison, that was the state at 4%. I think you said that was their 5-year average compared to the 6.5. But I guess, you know, I hope the committee's looking at this, because I have, no insult intended, but I have no way of knowing how much churning's going on. I don't know what the fee structure is, whether it's based on a percent of investment or whether it's based on trades, or, you know, I just don't know. And from year to year, whether it varies, you just don't get that information on these charts.
Sure.
And it's always a problem I have with them. I mean, when I invest, I look at no load versus load.
Right.
You know, and that makes a big difference. And here we don't know what the load is, you know.
Sure.
Well, I
Lisa?
can tell you for your mutual funds, they are all no load. I can also tell you that at every meeting we have with the investment committee, we compare the expense ratio of each of those funds with a group of its peers out of Morningstar. And they are all equal to or lower pretty much across the board. There's one that from time to time might be 1 basis point higher, but its performance is quite good also, so that's worth stomaching. As far as the fees otherwise, it is an asset level fee charged by PNC. It's on a graduated scale. And do you know that right off the top of your head?
It's right about 30 basis points.
So you, it ends up being right around 30 basis points, and that includes custody of the assets as well.
3%.
No, not 3%.
30 basis.
0.3%.
0.3%.
0.3.
Okay.
Any other questions,
Yeah.
comments?
You made the comparative reference to the state plan and those difference in obligations and returns. I know you cite the 4%. Do you have the comparative figure for the 13.5%?
I have it pronounced 10.6% for last year, 13 fiscal year, and 10.6% for state plan 1 year.
Have it right there, too.
Right, and for the 3 years for the state plan,
It's 4.
10% even.
I'm sorry.
For the 3-year,
Yes,
it's 10,
And the 5-year was 4.
correct.
I also have comparisons for the city, Baltimore's fire and police pension plan as well, for comparisons to the mic. The 1 year for last year.
Maybe you could-
fiscal year ending.
Glenn, do you want to?
Grab a mic.
The city,
Tell us who you are.
I'm the committee chairperson. I'm Glenn Fusick, CPA with the fire department. I'm the pension chairperson, head the committee since 2004 when PNC took over. I'm very proud of our committee members and our performance numbers and the service that we provide to the city. But Baltimore Fire and Police Pension and Retirement Systems last year was 9.45%. Their 3-year was 10.85, and their 5-year was 5.69. So we're right on top, if not exceeding that level of other performance of the larger pension plans.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I was not impugning the work of the committee.
No, I
I just
understand.
have a technical curiosity.
No, it's a challenging thing because when you think about an institutional investment class of a mutual fund, it is very different than a, let's call it a retail or brokerage investment mutual fund expense ratio. So it's very important to note the differences, so it is challenging. But yeah, that's something that the committee has taken upon themselves over the last 3 years to really focus in on. One of the benefits that PNC provides is access to those institutional share classes, and we try to bring those to our clients at much lower levels of cost so that we can provide, additional value add.
Anyone else?
Well, it seems like it's very efficiently run. Everything's gone up that should go up, and I'm sure that Karen would let us know if it weren't PDQ.
And I do want to thank and recognize the work of the committee members who put in their time to help manage that.
But, again, I want to emphasize that the city has on its back so far, both compensating for the market performance in prior years when, yes, it's picked back up, but we lost the ability to put money in that trust fund in those poorly performing years. And so the city is carrying that, and we are also carrying the responsibility to keep increasing that reserve, that net reserve in the trust fund, rather than just let it go, at a stable or not even contribute what we should. We're increasing it, which is the way we need to go.
Any other
Thank you.
questions, comments? Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us in.
Next on our agenda is the Housing and Neighborhoods Legislation update. We have Chief Holtzman and John Lestitian coming to the table.
Mr. Boyer will be joining us as well.
Great. Happy New Year. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
No, these are all three of yours. Yeah. Okay. This is, all right.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. As discussed last week, staff worked with the city attorney. The cover memo for tonight's presentation outlined the areas that we were going to come back with some revised language. Mr. Boyer has worked diligently, I would say, in a short period of time to make the recommended edits. And if you will, I'll just kind of give a brief overview and then defer to Mark. In terms of combining things into one ordinance, instead of requiring 2 licenses, what we're talking about is a certification of a designated operator or owner. We get to the same point, but instead of mentioning 2 licenses in one ordinance. So we're looking right now at Chapter 197. So that's the big change there, taking the proposed Chapter 77, combining it into 197. In Chapter 95, the changes, or Chapter 95, the changes are to include another track to become a chronic nuisance property. We don't have the specific calls in there, but that can be a point of discussion for tonight. We would come back next week at a work session to finalize in preparation for introduction at the end of the month. So Mark, if you want to kind of cover some of the additional highlights and maybe a little bit more detail of how it flows legally, and then we'll be able to respond to any questions.
Sure. What I did was previously you had a version of a proposed new chapter of the city code that has now been incorporated into chapter 197. We've changed and combined some of those definitions. Many of the definitions in chapter 197 were going to be revised for consistency with the new chapter anyway. So all of those definitional sections are basically just a combination of the two documents you had in front of you previously. The main thrust of the new material in chapter 197 are subsections 7, 8, and 9. And 7 is the required crime-free housing seminar, the training program. Subsection 8 is the written lease requirement, and that has been amended as requested to just generally reference criminal activity. And subsection 9 deals with the enforcement of the crime-free provision by the landlord as being a requirement under the newly revised chapter. Additionally, you'll see in subsection 12, we do still have the crime-free certification, which is the voluntary program that the police department envisions occurring for a landowner, property owner that wants to go above and beyond what is required through the program. A couple of the combination of the two chapters did require a slight tweaking of one of our prior exemptions to the rental facility ordinance. It's still there. We had an exemption since the inception of the rental facility ordinance for new construction that was 4 years old or less. To make it function a little bit as I combine the two ordinances, that exemption now appears in 2 locations. Those properties will still be exempt from payment of the license fee and exempt from the inspection requirements of the rental facility ordinance, which was the proposal. They're just located in a different section.
And for clarity, they would not be exempt from the required training for the designated. So they would still have to register with us.
They'd still have to have written lease provisions
and take
as well.
the training and include the lease provision. But there would be no fee for that 4-year period of new construction and no inspections.
The other specific revision that was requested, I believe, last week was that the seminar training will only be required again if there's a violation of the ordinance.
Could you explain 197-12?
That is the voluntary program, the crime-free certification for a specific property.
Like for the apartment complexes, those kinds of.
That's correct. That's the voluntary program that the chief has described before, where you have a property owner that does go above and beyond the requirements of the code.
First of all, I want to thank everybody involved in this. Got a good turnout quickly. It's interesting. I continue having discussions with landlords that I think are very responsible individuals who have concerns, and I don't know how. Hopefully, I understand this, and I think it's clear on your mark on 190. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I do want to commend everybody for doing this. And I was indicating that I've had some conversations with some responsible landlords who have a concern that I did not think was accurate, and I still do not think they are. And turning to 197-11, A rental facility license may be denied, revoked, or suspended in whole or in part at any time by code administration for the rental units in which a violation occurs. And specifically what I'm getting to is I've had some folks think that this law, the example would be this. I am a professional property management individual, and I manage 40 rental properties. And one of my rental properties, I'm in violation. That individual thought this law meant that his license to manage all rental properties in the city of Hagerstown would be revoked and his livelihood would be removed. And I assured him that was not my understanding.
That is correct under the section that you just referenced. However, if someone loses their, either the landlord or their designated agent loses their certification for operating as a crime-free housing operator, then they're going to have to find a replacement.
Now,
For that particular property where there's a violation.
Each particular unit requires that there be a certified operator.
okay.
If your operator loses his certification, then potentially all your units are in jeopardy.
Now,
But we have built in the 90-day provision for the recertification.
Now, how
as
does he lose his
necessary.
certification?
Failure to use a written lease, failure to enforce the crime-free language in the lease after being on chronic nuisance status. Those would be the ways that it could lose that.
And to be clear, Mark, on 11, the first line says a rental facility license.
Well, that's correct. That's the only license we're issuing is the rental facility license. The language which Councilman Menster referenced is dealing with a property maintenance code violation that goes unaddressed. And that would deal with the suspension at that particular unit.
Is that the section that's raising the concern, is 11?
Well, I'm curious.
Well, I think you have to keep reading. It says
I'd like to see where the, Mark, if you could get me to where the section is that would indicate how he loses his license.
I would think that's in 197.7, top of the following page. Certification as a residential operator shall remain valid so long as the certified individual is not in violation of provisions of the chapter or Chapter 95. Is that the appropriate section?
That's it.
Such violations shall subject the operator to revocation of the certification.
Referring to the crime-free portion of it.
Yes, so if someone doesn't take the training and they're given a provisional certification pending training,
And that's pretty clear to me.
Yeah.
The educational aspect is an upfront thing, that if a landlord said, I'm not doing the educational thing, that would be something that would encompass everything he does.
And the other part is if whoever this identified person is, if they are managing a chronic nuisance property.
Okay, so first we have to get to the chronic nuisance
You have to get to the
property.
chronic
Is that correct? And until we get to chronic nuisance stage, he doesn't have anything to worry about, this operator.
Correct.
Okay.
But if they become a chronic nuisance, and it takes some doing to become a chronic nuisance.
That's my understanding. It's not easy.
Then that property owner, if they're, or the designated person, if they're not doing the right thing to try to correct the situation, then yes, they can lose their ability to be designated for any property.
Now, can you indicate how many chronic nuisance properties we've had under this statute?
Sure, that data sheet I just handed out.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
It's
didn't
okay.
notice
Nobody had
that
a chance to
one.
read it. Let me just cover that real quick. The short story is, if the current policy was in place last year, we would have a total of 36 properties that hit chronic nuisance, out of all of them in the city, just 36. Starting at the top of that sheet, the police responded to 6,600 calls for service at different houses. Only 1,500 of those were even qualified as qualifying calls under the ordinance. And then you can see where we went back a second time, and then you hit the third time, we're only down to 36 houses or apartments out of all of them that would have even hit the chronic nuisance phase. After that one, when you hit number 4, now we're only down to 15 locations. That's when you start to fall into chronic nuisance stage, and you could be fined if you're not taking reasonable steps. So let's say, the example we get is, well, what if I tried to evict and I couldn't evict? And then the police get called back there again. You took a reasonable step. Even though we're there a 4th time, we're tracking it, you're doing what you can do, you would not get a fine.
Not only that, just Chief, for those that are listening, for purposes of this discussion, you responded to 36 addresses, which had 3 qualifying calls, but 80% of them were renter occupied, so 20% of them wouldn't even fit into our discussion for how we're discussing this, right?
Absolutely, yeah. You're talking about the owner-occupied ones.
Right, so you're talking about probably less than 30 in the entire city of rental properties. We had, looking at this, I'm assuming we had 10. I'm trying to look at, do we have anybody that was placed on the chronic nuisance list? It looks like we had.
Yeah, we did. We did actually have one, and we sent one letter out for that one that was placed on probationary status, and we've seen a turnaround on that property. So, and that's just, and actually that was if it was over a year period. The current ordinance is 6 months, so they're not even hitting that. They're not even triggering that. We're just mailing the letter out. When they hit 3, we're mailing a warning letter, and we're getting some response. One of our properties did go well over 10, and we did get a response back from the property owner. It's helped. So.
Point of clarification, the last line on that table, I think there's a discrepancy. It says HPD responded to 10 addresses, which address had 11 or more, but over in the column there's a 4. I'm just wondering if that was an error.
Probably an error.
So it's that 10 in the text should be 4?
Right, 4, yes, you're right. The very last column there. So
Another clarification. The bold line, 3 qualify, should it be 3 or more?
It could be read as 3 or more. No, 36 had 3.
Are these numbers below
I see what you're saying.
in part of the 36, or are they in addition to the 36?
The ones below are part of the 36.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it's 3 or more then in the bold line. Like you have down below, 3 or more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It just says
and
3.
then as you look within that, inside that 36, you start to
Right,
narrow it
and
to
these
15
are
to 11.
the breakdowns within that 36.
Yes.
Okay, that's the way I was reading it, but it needs to say 3 or more on the bold line if it goes,
Certainly.
thank.
And if, next week.
Thanks for the data, though. This really helps us.
Yeah, it does support, and we sort of, we're doing it along the way with just our own experience and some raw data that we have, but putting this all together, it really does support the ordinance as we have before you, which is lowering it from 10 all the way down to 3. It's a big jump. Why are we doing that jump? And this supports it right here, so.
And it seems to me, how many rental units do we have?
We're up to about almost 8,700.
Okay, so we have 8,700 rental units, and historically, 36 of these units, and I'm not good at math, so I don't know what that percentage would be, would have even gotten to a point where they would have been notified that they need to do something. And the reason I say that is because if I've had one overwhelming statement made to me is, you need to go after the bad apples and not cause a problem for good landlords. And what I have tried to do, and I think staff has done a very commendable job, is being able to say to those folks, well, this ordinance was in effect right now, other than 1 2-hour educational session, only 36 out of 8,000 units would have even made it to getting the letters, and that sounds like we're leaving 8,000 rental units with good landlords alone and not causing them a problem and not going after them.
Once they've done the initial.
In fact,
Once they've done the initial 2-hour educational, which we would hope to think at the end of that educational that instead of saying it was just another government thing that they actually got something out of it and it was positive.
Not only that, but trying to protect landlords by making sure they have a written lease. You know, maybe there are some.
Well, I candidly, I think when you tell landlords that or other people that, that's the old story of knock, 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 I'm from the government here to help you, and I don't think most private people want that kind of help, although I think written leases are as important for the landlord as they are the tenant. I think it protects everybody, and what I'm looking at is if we adopted the ordinance with the 3 calls, that last year there would have been 36 properties out of over 8,000 that would have even had to address an issue. And that doesn't mean anything would have happened to them, except they would have been notified and need to indicate to you all, what are you doing about it?
If we had the addresses for all of these, everybody would know exactly where we're talking about in every single neighborhood throughout the city of Hagerstown.
So Chief, just clarify though, when the 1,556 got 1 qualifying call at 366-2, they're going to get letters from you guys just saying you've had a qualifying call, just to clarify what Councilmember Metzner was saying about a letter.
Sure, how many stamps are we sending out? That's our goal. Even at the very first time, we want to know if it was measurable. Could we actually do that? That's not that many envelopes to mail. And so our goal is the very first one, to mail them a letter, send them an email, let them know there was a qualifying call, there was something happened at your property last night, let them know, and then having the dedicated staff to respond to it, to explain what that would be, because they're going to call. And I think we're going to even lower that number more, because what we'll end up doing is we'll stop a lot more back here at that first call.
So they could get letters before they hit 3 calls.
But not a problem,
But not
just
a-
notification.
Not a
First
withdrawal of their
notice,
license.
second
or their
notice, third and final,
certification.
that
Right.
sort of thing, yes.
It's a heads up.
And that protects from if they do get to a violating, they can't say, oh, well, that was out of nowhere. I didn't have any warning. So that,
If I could add some clarification on the number of units in that. The 8,700, that's individual apartments. In terms of the property addresses, we're probably more in the range of 3,400 in terms of just physical structures. If we were to develop the second track for the code administration nuisance type things, high weeds, trash, debris around the property, things that cause diminution to the properties. And I'll bring in statistics next week. I'd mentioned that we issue about 1,800 notices for those types of violations. Properties, the number of properties that receive more than that one notice is in about the 640 range. 3 notices, we're down to about 240. And so then that's when you have somebody achieving a status, if we were to achieve that same 3. And when you get to 4, we're down to about 80 properties. So it would be 80 properties that would be having issues, unless they just change how they manage their properties. And it's staff's hope that by having that track, where someone could be designated as a chronic nuisance property and have to pay for that city service of being told to once again cut your grass, that people would change their behaviors and modify their behaviors, so we would have more staff time to spend on the larger code type issues.
Question, Mark. It just looks like it needs a little bit of clarifying work. Your definitions in 95-2. If you go to the very last sentence there, you know, there's a colon with nothing after it.
That's where we'll have a list of nuisance property maintenance code violations.
That you're going to let us know, so we.
Have not yet been identified.
Okay, that's fine. I'm actually reading this thing.
Yeah, and and that
think
might
you-
lead into a discussion of where the
Right.
council might want to go with that.
And then, so there's also no misunderstanding, as I'm reading under the same section, that the qualifying offenses that we're talking about, they're the ones listed under disturbance, is that correct?
That's correct. That's for the calls for service to the police department.
So
Correct.
that's when somebody wanted to say, well, what is a qualifying event? They're there.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then we would have a separate list for high weeds, trash, debris, nuisance-type code conditions of
Right,
properties.
and I think we want to look carefully at that with regards to, I want to be cautious on how we do that with regards to people losing their licenses and things of that nature.
Absolutely,
But that's
sir.
not here, and we haven't discussed that yet.
And we would have the same type of review. It wouldn't be the inspector. Inspector would be trained in what's qualified and what doesn't qualify, but then a manager would review to make the final determination if it's a qualifying call.
I think this is a lot of work in a week, so thanks for bringing this back. But I want to mention under, and Mark, I'm not sure we've given you a chance to go through as far as you want to do, but since we're making comments, under rental facilities, the statement of purpose, there's two places where you say the purpose of this chapter. One is the original language, and then one in the new writing. And just like you have elsewhere, you probably need to say additional purpose, or try to clean up the number of times we mention purpose.
I'll do that.
I don't know.
We combined the.
I understand, but I think I could see a member of the legal profession presenting this to a judge and say, well, what is the purpose? This one or this one, you know? Right? And then spin things around the following verbiage, and I think that could be a problem.
Lawyers don't
I think we
spin
ought to look at
anything,
the
do
number of
they?
times we say purpose in that.
Not the ones at this table.
Well, am I not correct, though? I think.
No, I agree. There's
I
some
think we
cleanup
need
that
to
can be done there.
modify or somehow look at the number of times we say purpose as a cleanup item. And Mark, I just want to say, did you get an opportunity to walk us through all you wanted to walk us through?
I believe I did. If you've got any,
Well,
what you see in Chapter 197 is
Yeah.
a combination of what you've seen previously.
Yes. Some of us may have comments when we come back again, because this is the first time we've seen it.
And we'll be back,
Thank you all for.
back on next
Yeah.
Tuesday's
A
work
lot of work
session.
on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
If it's good to go then, which we hope it is, then we would introduce it on the 28th. But you've got another week next week to give us input.
Let me ask one question. Suppose you have a property that's in bankruptcy or has been taken over by the bank. And the bank, surely no bank in Washington County would do this, but there are banks outside the county, would tend to sell it or transfer it to a subsidy of the bank. Does this law allow you to reach those individuals?
Our definition of owner allows us to reach anyone that has the financial interest in the property. So the short answer is yes, sir.
If the banks keep transferring it to itself or other banks, how do we know who the owner is?
Well,
How do you-
Typically, we start with SDAT and who they have listed as the owner, and if a question arises, we'll bring the title to date in the land records to confirm that we have the proper owner. Sometimes we're chasing our tail a little bit and trying to catch up to them, but ultimately we can get them.
And if it's a recent foreclosure, starting in October of 12, the state has a database that municipalities can log into. So if it's a foreclosure post then, we'd be able to pull up the bank information from the state.
And that database is up to date?
It's as current as it's better than we've ever had.
Okay.
It's not maintained by us. We have access to it.
I'm specifically thinking of the property on Hamilton Boulevard. Remember where that lady was killed at the Fairgrounds Park a few years ago? And now I don't know, the bank seems to be playing razzle-dazzle with it.
And it's difficult to get a response from banks.
Yeah.
That's for sure, as a general rule.
All right, so we'll see this again next week. And I would encourage council members to get in touch with staff if they have questions in the meantime that that come up, or you want clarification on anything, staff is available.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the Professional Boulevard Design Phase.
Yes.
We have some special guests from the county here with us tonight.
Good evening.
County Administrator Greg Murray and Rob Slocum.
Greg Snook is here.
And Greg Snook from Chief is also in the audience with us.
Rob's the Director of Engineering and Construction Management at the county, and has been very helpful to me working through this process. But yeah, we have a project here that we've been discussing for decades, and it's one step closer to reality. As you saw in your packet, the county has secured a $1,120,000 grant from Maryland Department of Transportation for the planning and design of what is called the Professional Court Bridge. What that means is that the county now will be putting out a request for proposals for design services for not only that bridge, but also what we call the approach roads, or the road that feeds into the bridge on each side. And so why we're here tonight is to ask if for your endorsement of the county, including the city's interests related to this project in the RFP. Specifically, what we're thinking there is what would be the widening of existing professional court to the ultimate cross-section of probably 4 lanes, possibly some modifications to some turn lanes on Eastern Boulevard, and things like that. So that is the status of the RFP. I guess as we would move forward, Rob, did you have anything else you wanted to go over?
Right now, the Secretary's grant, as Ronnie mentioned, has been approved. We're in the process of executing that grant, meaning signatures back and forth between the state. The county's executed its portion of it. So we're probably looking at about 6 weeks or so before the actual RFP would hit the street for advertisement, and that would begin the design process. The bridge itself is estimated about $7 million. The design, therefore, of the bridge itself is about 10% of that, or $700,000. So we will campaign the state, although the grant includes the bridge specifically in the language, we will campaign the state to allow us to go both ways toward Eastern Boulevard with design of widening for professional court existing, as well as in the other direction for the proposed professional boulevard. So we'll get as much design out of this project as we can.
A couple of questions. Really just 3. I guess maybe it appears a little different from much older iterations that I'm familiar with, to encompass a larger portion of the Meritus property in terms of the alignment of the road on the left side of the screen there. It goes down around the Abrams property and then into the Chief. So maybe my question there is, as part of the overall project proposal, is the city, county, or chief, or whomever charged with construction going to be required to purchase the right-of-way from that Meritus property, or is Meritus providing that right-of-way?
Either one is possible. Of course, the county would like to think that that would be a donation by Meritus, but we're not in the right-of-way acquisition portion at this point. So for other similar arrangements, there's been memorandums of agreement, MOUs or MOAs, to address property acquisition.
Okay. I mean, I know that issue's been brought up before, and it just seems odd to me that you're providing that level of infrastructure improvement to the accessibility and development of that property to then have to go and purchase, millions of dollars worth of transportation-related infrastructure that you're virtually putting in for at no cost to the property owner. And the second is, and I brought this up last time that this was brought in, and I'm not familiar with the county programs. I know you have a number of major road infrastructure improvements within your overall CIP. Does the advancement of this funding push back other identified road projects, whether it be the widening of Eastern Boulevard North around the Y, or Southern Boulevard, or other road sections?
No, it doesn't. In fact, and to be clear, we're talking about a design of the bridge, which is a grant from the Secretary of Transportation. So this design is completely independent of any local funding. This is in the CIP priority as such, so it does not affect the other projects that you've mentioned.
Okay. I guess my concern is you get the money from the state for design of this project, and then other road improvements. One that I think is important is that the extension beyond the YMCA gets set back 10 years, you know what I mean, and you know, may not address the level of traffic volume or traffic issues in that prioritized fashion versus, you know, project identification. And then the last item, which isn't wholly related to this, but I guess it is, I'm assuming that part and parcel to the reason that the city is being asked to participate in this process is this road to some degree will be designed to certain city standards. And this is probably a question more for other folks as it relates to the extension of the city, or at least the consideration of extension of the city into that area. In other words, I understand it, you know, it's currently outside of the city corporate boundary, but we're being asked to participate in design of a road that's, or at least a connection for a road outside of the city to city standards. I'm assuming that's because there's some consideration, or at least some awareness by all parties, that annexation will be at least a consideration as part of this larger process.
Yeah. From what I've seen of the design, it meets city standards for the pavement design. They have a closed section on the outside of the road where they have curbs, median design, the lane widths, all those kind of things. The one deviation I saw was there's a multi-use path for bicycles and pedestrians on one side rather than sidewalks on both sides, which is our typical standard, but it seemed like a reasonable accommodation of pedestrians and bicycles.
In a non-residential open section area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And you're talking about the section across the bridge.
Correct, in the section that they've already started design on.
Yeah, we've installed a 8-foot shared use path throughout the project along all the red lines that you see up there on the screen for mobility, both pedestrian and bicycle access. So.
And an 8-foot has certain advantages. It allows that bicycle and other circulation.
No, I think that's great.
I would like to see the bridge have sidewalks on both sides, because currently we don't have a safe, accessible bridge across the Antietam Creek in the city of Hagerstown. The one on 40 is atrocious for pedestrians, and we have hotels on the other side of the creek that we would hope folks would walk across the bridge closer to downtown to some of the things going on there, but there's just no safe way for people to do that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there was certainly, we're certainly shooting for sidewalk on both sides. We will absolutely have sidewalk on one side, depending on bridge dimensions and so forth, budget constraints. But one side is a definite, and we are, in our scope, shooting for 2 sides of sidewalk.
It says here on this information we've been handed out that the staff is seeking authorization to participate in the design of the extension of professional court by allowing city staff to assist the county staff. I can't think, excuse me, I can't think of a good reason in the world not to permit that to happen.
Correct.
I just can't, no matter how hard I try. So I think that's great to see the city and the county working together, especially when it doesn't obligate us to any future monies. Secondly, how wide is professional court now?
It's 50 feet.
It's 36 feet of pavement from curb to curb.
Oh, it is, only 36 feet?
Correct.
And you want to go to 70?
70
right-of-ways.
is existing right-of-way. So when it was laid out in the 80s, there was some foresight put into professional court having a slightly wider right-of-way than, say, Conrad Court or Diamond Drive. It is 70 feet. So in my mind, sitting here today, what I think it's going to wind up looking like is like Northern Avenue, where you'd have 4 lanes and sidewalks on both sides. It may look more like Moggins Avenue till we're done if it needs the center turn lane. If that's the case, we'll probably lose the sidewalk on one side. We'll have to figure those things out.
Okay. Well, I just want to say this for what it's worth. I really think the areas on Eastern Boulevard where you have some trees, right in the middle where you have some trees and flowers and stuff, add to the aesthetics of that road. And I think that sort of thing, if it's possible to do, would add to the aesthetics of professional court too. So if there's a possibility that you can take a look at that, I would appreciate it.
Okay.
And I want to say one final thing. The money for this project didn't fall out of heaven. When I was in Annapolis, I sat on the Transportation Subcommittee of the Budget Committee for 19 years. And you learn very rapidly that money doesn't fall out of heaven. The money for this project came because Delegate John Donahue went to the governor, and Delegate John Donahue went to the secretary and persuaded the secretary to come to Washington County and to look at the project. And the secretary approved or made a commitment to Delegate Donahue that he would support this project. And I think Delegate Donahue deserves a lot of credit for getting the kind of money that it's going to take to complete this project. So it's going to be incredible when we get this bridge finished. It's going to make help quality of life in this county quite a bit. So I appreciate what you guys are doing. Thank you.
Mr. Brubaker.
Yes, I have a scope question. Almost for sure, and unfortunately, and I feel it's unfortunately, Don mentioned the median on existing Eastern Boulevard. Seems to me that when you're coming, I guess it would be southbound from Jefferson towards Professional Court, that the existing left turn lane isn't going to be nearly adequate for the traffic turning left onto Professional Court, thereby, requiring an extension back into that beautiful median that the city built only about 6 or 7 years ago. And I would like that to be, because I've talked to Rodney, and almost for sure the traffic situations are going to show the need, studies are going to show the need for that. And I think that should be, and for this amount of money, be included in the scope of design as well. We'll figure out later who pays for what, but I think it should be in the design so that it's there and part of, if necessary, part of any bid process.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that comment, because one of the overviews of the entire project is to have a study included that says what traffic will be generated for a design horizon of probably 25 years. So that would address lefts in, off, and rights out, as well as traffic on Professional Court, and ultimately what will be Professional Boulevard from end to end.
So you think it's reasonable to, I think you have enough traffic studies. There was a pretty micro study done of these road movements just a few years ago. And, it's going to show, and there's going to be a need for a left turn lane. And if you know enough to design this whole road, you should be able to determine that and what length it needs to be for stacking and include it in the design. That would be, I hope, something we can do. Get that out of the way.
Yeah. We'll make it as long as it needs to be, or as long as we possibly can make it. We do have some constraints out there.
On the other hand, I hate to see any more of that median taken up. But Dawn, we're going to have to do it, or we're going to have people spilling back out and rear-end collisions.
I understand that.
Yeah. But I think it's something that should be included. Okay. The second question I had was, again, a traffic movement question. I've lost track how many times these road networks have changed. I followed it, and I followed it when I was on the EDC, but this one, I don't remember seeing this one before. I'm sure you guys have had it for a while. But has Meritus and the first responders and public safety looked at this arrangement? And because there's going to be a lot of first responders, it seems to me, coming over this bridge, because it really cuts off time from the center and the northern parts
Yeah.
of Hagerstown. And, you know, in my opinion, it should have been done when the hospital was built, but that's water, you know, under the bridge, whatever it is, over the dam, under the bridge, whatever. Have they looked at this in terms of access to the hospital? Because, again, that seems to me one of the key reasons for doing this bridge, the college and the hospital.
Yeah, my staff actually ran routes of the existing, so had them start at Eastern and Professional and run 3 routes of what it takes today to get from there to the hospital, and then run as much as we could, model a approach through the existing routes that you see there, and it saves a minimum of 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And it saves a minimum of, from what we can tell, 5 traffic signals. So if you hit every signal, it's going to save you more than 5 minutes. So it's a response time that I think everyone will be happy with.
Well, okay, you're saying you modeled it through this. I mean, I know it's going to cut time off. That's not my question. My question was this design compared to previous designs that had this meeting, you know, coming straight down and meeting I guess it's Yale Drive extended farther west.
Yeah, it's probably, it would still be going through 2 roundabouts as it is today. It's probably a difference of a few hundred feet. So it's the same number of intersections, same travel, a few hundred feet at 25 miles per hour it's less than a minute. Maybe at best 30 seconds.
Right.
But one of the reasons for doing that design was it saved us considerable amount of money in design efficiency construction. So.
And I guess that traffic circle is going to be something they can maneuver fairly quickly, because if they're coming that way, they're going to have to go 3/4 of the way around to get to the hospital.
That'll be a right turn up to the first one through the
first one's
roundabout.
1/4 the way I see it. Second, if they're coming over the bridge.
So they'll get up there, make a right turn at that roundabout, and then make what would be traditionally a left turn through the roundabout to Meredith.
Any other questions or discussions? Seems like we have a consensus to authorize staff to work with the county on this. And
Mayor, could I just reemphasize this one more time?
Please.
You know, with our work in government, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes where various levels of government work together. The public never ever knows about it. The only thing they know about are the squabbles that might take place between the governments. And here is an incredible project, which undoubtedly is going to, at some point, increase the tax base of Hagerstown. It's going to save lives. It's going to increase educational and job opportunities. 3 governments are working together to make this happen publicly. And that is a really good thing, and I hope that the public acknowledges the fact that good things happen when governments do get together. So thank you all for what you're doing.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to go on the record thanking Rodney for the cooperation and the cooperative spirit. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Next item on our agenda is the Memorial Park Phase 2. So joining Rodney will be Steve Bachmiller.
Stormwater.
Oh, I'm sorry, Stormwater. I was getting ahead of myself.
Yes.
Our city engineer.
Is that anti-environmentalist? Is that?
Yes is the answer to whether they should request rates.
Yeah, the specific request here, and I think Mr. Metzner's intention is to get us back on track with our agenda. The question on the table is, do we want them to pursue grant funding to create more stormwater-friendly
They don't require
systems?
matches.
Yeah, they do.
They do require matches.
I counted 280,000 in matches.
They're not required.
280,000
Some of them
is what I counted.
Yeah, some of them required matches.
The programs
specifically say matches are not required.
I know, but the city staff's proposals, Lou, that,
Right, I think that they say that they're not required, but our experience has been that
It increases
some
the
sort of a
likelihood that
match
they award
makes your,
them. Right.
makes your application stronger.
Yeah. So we have a yes, yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Do you need any, just so I'm clear on the agenda, do you guys need any formal votes by the mayor and council on any of these grant applications? Some state programs require that, some don't. Or just let us know, I guess.
Not that we're
we're-
aware of. I think what will
okay.
happen is if we are fortunate enough to get the grants, then we would come in with grant agreements.
Just for
And then you would
approval.
vote on that.
So we don't need any at the front end.
Thank you. Thanks for pursuing these. I know it takes a lot of time. Okay, now we are up to Memorial Park, and we're almost back on track with our agenda. Phase 2. I just have to start off by saying, I don't know if it was the editorial by Tim Rowland that had you guys reconsider some of the historical aspects of the markers, but I do really like the list that you put together, and I like the way it's organized into 20-year periods.
Well, what we hope that people understand of the last list is that was kind of a first cut.
Sure,
It was never intended to
absolutely.
be the final
Right.
product, so.
Well, this is just a follow-up from our discussion in October. Just kind of filling in some of the gaps and some of the questions that you all had for us that we want to come back to you with. Memorial Park, everybody remembers it's corner of Potomac Street and Memorial Boulevard. The first phase was completed last year, and Junior Mason and his staff put kind of the bones of the park in, some of the trails and those kind of things. What we have before you tonight now is the next phase, Phase 2, and what that includes is a couple things. The first thing I have up on the screen is the plaza, which would be right off of Potomac Street. Basically, as you're looking at that, you'd be like where Bester School is now, looking across the street at the Memorial Plaza. In that plaza, then, are these walls, really are pieces of granite that would have honorees on there for our Hall of Honor. So the people that have made a significant contribution in our community over the years would be on this, on these walls that you see in this plaza. The second part of this phase would be to remember events that happened in the city's history. So to the right here, you have Potomac Street, the plaza, which is right along Potomac Street, and then this path, which is an existing path. Along that path, we would put these markers that are basically steel markers that would be every 20 years of city history. As you would walk around that path, on those markers would have the information that's provided in your packet on what occurred during that 20-year period. And I have to really thank Steve and a host of other people that contributed to that list of, for that timeline that's in the packet now. Also, working with the staff at Community Development, this interior path, since it would not have any of the historic markers on it, we thought about putting a character counts theme on that trail, where markers similar to something like this would be embedded in the asphalt as you're walking along there, and then the 6 pillars of character counts would be, you could read those as you walk through that inner trail. So it kind of gives that trail a little bit of a theme to it as well.
You can fit this amount of verbiage on those markers? Have you checked to see if this amount of verbiage would actually fit?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, we're going to have to work at that.
Yeah.
But there was so much good information, and we really had mostly we found that we were editing out
I
things
understand, you
and trying
edited
to
it
paring
down.
it down.
History's always like that, but,
Right.
but still, it just seems like a lot of narrative that would, to fit on one of those. It'd be educational for people if they
Right.
know it's there, but.
Yeah, as they were putting it together, I found it very interesting. I think, you know, it's a human level. I mean, you're walking up to it. You can stop there. You can read as long as you want to. I think I think we can make it work.
Just the second comment, this is just a comment I have, that there's no city general funds involved in the proposed funding of this second phase. It's CDBG, excise taxes that we got from revenue, past development in the county, and the rest is program open space funds from the state of Maryland. So staff have put this together with no city tax money, the way I read it.
That's right.
Okay.
And that's part of the proposal tonight.
Yep.
Only suggestion I would have, and it's just a suggestion for thought process in the future, and that is incorporating technology here, like we've done at City Park. and
Oh,
some
with the
other
QR
things.
codes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
whether QR codes are the way to do it, or some other method, and
Like if
I
you
don't
want to
have that
learn more
answer now.
about this event, you know, scan this
Right.
thing here.
And you know,
Take it to the
that
website.
certainly is something that could always be worked in the future, just
Yeah.
a thought process to think about it.
We'll
Put
work
one of
it
those
in.
little app things at the bottom of each one.
Yeah, we'll work it in as part of this phase. We can make that happen. We've had a lot of positive response to those.
Yeah, I would think so.
My
And
only
especially
question
our
is-
younger generation, I mean, they're
Right.
going to want something like that. For us old folks, it's not so
Just getting the young
important.
people to go to the park and take a
Mhm.
walk
That's
will be
still interesting.
a challenge. My only question is, I see we have proposed locations for future historic event markers, but that'll only give us 40 more years, right?
Yeah,
So
somebody else can deal with it.
Actually, I guess
Well, Dave will still be around. That's why he's concerned.
Steve's granddaughter will be.
Dave will still be around.
I guess it actually gives you 30, 50. So the next marker would go up in 2070. Gives you more like 60 years. And we figured at that time they'll probably all need replaced. Is our kind of our rationale.
We'll just cut out the beginning.
by that point, everything will be just a QR code.
Yeah,
Right,
probably.
That's right, probably
Yeah.
What do
so.
they call it? What do they call it when there's an image that's not really
Oh,
there?
yeah, yeah.
Holistic.
Hologram.
Holistic is what I was going to
Yeah,
say.
Jonathan Hager will meet you
So
there.
there'll be a
Yes, there you
hologram.
go. Good work. I really appreciate the collaboration that
job.
you took with other members of the
And
community.
I
I
thank
think
Steve
that's
again for putting all that
Good
together.
job,
a great approach.
Hey, just one question. Obviously, and sadly, there's going to be vandalism. And also, there's going to be deterioration of the monuments. Is there going to be some kind of a fund established to make those repairs
Turn your mic off.
and to take care of the vandalism?
I think there will be, probably just in our operating budget, we'll have to put a small amount of money each year for those kind of things, maintenance. And something I didn't really get to yet was we should come back to you now with recommendations on a committee that would start to determine who's going to be in this Hall of Honor. And I think each year, maybe this first year, we want to put, I suggested maybe 8 names up there. We put those up there when we kind of cut the ribbon of the park.
Jonathan Hager.
Yeah. But then each year, we want to add a couple more, and whoever those people are. So there needs to be a group of people that work at that. And I don't, that should come from the community, I think. So we'll have that in our operating budget.
Okay. And regarding that issue in general, that's a very good point. That's, in the planning office, we've identified that as something to look at because we put up those nearly about 4 dozen markers around the community, which over time will start needing some maintenance. So we're looking at how to find ways to fund that as well.
Okay, that's good. I know when I was in Annapolis, we used to struggle all the time to figure out how to rebuild our monuments or refurbish our monuments, especially on battlefields because they were deteriorating so rapidly and they were so expensive to do. So good.
Just another technical question. And I ask this every time. I presume there's enough room here if we ever construct a trail. That's why we've left enough space, going along Memorial Boulevard.
Yes.
At least the 8-foot.
Yes, there absolutely is. And if you recall in December, just if I can take a little side note on this, in December when we talked about the abandonment of that CSX rail line,
Right.
and you authorized me to move forward with that, I've been in discussions with CSX, and they're telling us that there's probably a good chance, I'll say it that way, that we could get a trail across that railroad now because we're abandoning all those, or, working with them to abandon all those other ones.
Right.
So I think.
That's part of the trade-off. So
Exactly.
We offer, him to work with, yeah.
So what that means is a trail from City Park to Municipal Stadium could actually happen.
Yeah, it'd be great.
But
Good job. Thank you so much.
thank you. I guess we'll have this on the voting session just for authorization, or we can talk about
Move
it.
forward with phase 2.
Yeah. And the expenditure of the funds.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and this was, in the budget, so even though it's not city funds, it was.
Well, and we'll
all
have to
stuff
talk
that was
about the
budgeted.
development of a committee, because, we have to get them their financial
Yes.
disclosure forms and everything else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, thank you.
And
Last but not least, Potterfield Pool Management Services.
Yes.
Amy Jr. and I have been looking at the pool since the pool season ended, and we're trying to determine which way we want to go in the future. And we've also been contacted by several of these pool management companies, and other communities like Frederick, City of Frederick uses pool management companies. And basically they're saying to us, you need to put this out to bid. And that's effectively what we did, is we put out an RFP again to these pool management companies to see what kind of costs they would provide us the services that we're looking for. So what we're asking for is that you approve at the regular session a contract with one of these management companies, a company called American Pool Enterprises. And I can go through all the details of this, but basically you could summarize it by saying the cost will be lower than what we've seen the last couple of years.
Service will be enhanced.
Service will be enhanced. The pool will be open more because they'll be open on Mondays and longer in the season because we're closing in the middle of August. I think these management companies are structured, they're working with young people. And young people, I think, need incentives sometimes. So they use financial incentives for them to do a good job, and that's all built into their contract. That's not extra money we have to pay. So I think they're structured well, and we're hoping, and Amy's hoping, that over time we can expand some of the programs we have down there, and these pool management companies are geared towards doing that. So I don't know how many we'd have the first year, but after that I think we can do more and more things that'll make more people come to the Potterfield pool. So it's our recommendation to move forward with American Pool Enterprises.
Sounds good.
Got one yes.
Sounds excellent.
Another yes. Marty? Yes. Penny?
I just want to know, with working with these kids, and it's probably a no-brainer, but everybody is fingerprinted, are they not?
Yes. Yes, yeah.
Okay, because now we're going to be having an organization coming in, and even though they're saying hire local lifeguards, that's a biggie.
Yeah, they definitely are, and I'm sure they'll hire local.
Well, that's what it
the
said in
resource they
here,
have.
yeah.
It did.
Reduced costs and enhanced service equals good government.
And is Louis
So
still
good job.
at the, he still lives there, so if there's anything that goes off kilter, Louis should know.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we are ahead of schedule with the city administrator's comments.
I just wanted to echo council comments for Mark Holtzman and John Lestitian, Mark Boyer. They did do a lot of work to get those documents prepared. Didn't have them in the packet, all of them in the packet Friday of last week, but you still have a week to work on them. So just wanted to thank them for their efforts. We are trying to keep that legislation moving forward for the mayor and council. And that's it for me.
Turn it over to the council. Mr. Brubaker.
Just two things. Last Wednesday, I was in Annapolis for the Legislative Committee of MML, and following that, the MML reception for General Assembly and Governor's Office and the Annapolis staff. The Legislative Committee, there were quite a few pre-filed bills this year, several of which affected municipalities, and we reviewed those. We'll have 5 more meetings in the next month or two to go over legislation as it develops. Once again, the highest priority is highway user revenues. So we'll be working on that, and we're not even sure You know, last year, the governor put an additional 16 million in for municipalities beyond the pathetic 9% that we've been getting of the prior funding level. And we're lobbying just to get, to hope to get that in, but we're lobbying for a more permanent solution over the years. So, but it's a tough road. The committee that was appointed by the governor did not recommend, they did not recommend bringing back to municipalities and counties their fair share of the gas tax revenues. Because that's what, this goes back 70 years. 70 years that they've been doing this, and now they're backing out of it. And the thing is, localities can't impose a gas tax. They can't impose a transportation-related fund, and yet our share is just evaporating. So
it would be nice to know how much our citizens are paying or gas taxes being collected in Washington County, and how much of that we actually get
that
back.
applies all over the state. So. But so we're working on that, and a number of things, and generally I will contact staff when I feel there's something that needs to get worked on, and if it needs to come up to us,
One of the issues that came up at last summer's MML conference was this idea of ethics requirements. And since it came up earlier, I think it's a little appropriate. One of the concerns is that if we're going to require people who serve on a committee to name, to pick historical figures, and they have to disclose every financial interest they have in the city of Hagerstown, they're not going to volunteer.
Well,
and we're not going to find volunteers for any board, commission, committee, task force, or anything.
That's another major struggle, and it's something that we discussed, and we're fighting to that very factor.
But to get to the point that was brought up earlier, and I'm sorry Councilmember Alshire had to leave because I think this is more directed to him, but if the question or the qualm is that these people who I have chosen to be part of this project committee have some kind of financial interest, yes, that's the idea. And if there's an issue in terms of these people being able to make money, again, I have no problem with that. The more that people are making money in Hagerstown, the better it is for the city of Hagerstown. The idea is that these are project implementation partners. They're not the only people involved in this process, but I fear that if we're going to, create a burden on them in terms of reporting or disclosure, they're not going to be coming to the table to volunteer.
You may want to be concerned about words, because I think that's where the problem exists, Mayor. When you start talking about a committee, you then start getting definitions in the city code. When you start talking about what we've done in the past with consulting firms, which is identifying individuals that they may want to speak to, versus a committee appointed by the city as an ad hoc committee, I think that's...
This is not really a committee.
No,
These
well,
are
that's
consultants
up to
that the consultants would like to consult.
Right, that's up to other people to decide, but I think that's wherein probably the problem
Right, the
comes,
phraseology.
Exactly, that's my guess.
I understand.
If I may finish,
Please.
Mr. Mayor, just one more thing. At the reception, it was well attended, and this is an election year after all. And I spoke to many people. The main thing I emphasized for Hagerstown, since we didn't have the Maryland Theater thing hadn't arisen yet, and but I just did say Hagerstown's a player. We're here. We have good intentions, and just keep us on your radar screen rather than lobbying them for small things. So that was the approach I used.
Thank you for representing.
Well, again, I'm saying what the approach is if people want to talk to me about it or any specific concern. And congratulations to Gordon's.
Mr. Metzger.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually have a couple of things tonight. One, I want to thank on behalf of all of us, the Longmeadow Rotaries Club. Their invitation, not only to the city council, but to county commissioners and other elected officials to the dinner last night to hear these folks that are working on the Maryland Theater was a very nice thing. It obviously costs some money to do, and I think it was very informative. I want to thank them. And along that line, there's been a lot of controversy in the past, whether it's a baseball stadium or something else, about expenditures of taxpayers' money for things like this. I have the feeling that if there's one thing this entire community absolutely believes in and supports, and I heard it over and over again during the argument about the stadium, was the Maryland Theater is the gem in Hagerstown, and the Maryland Theater is what we need to address. And I agree, and I think it's exciting to see that we have the potential to get this theater in just a wonderful position. Hearing some of the acts that are coming are real different, and Councilmember Munson made some comments tonight on government working together for the bridge. The same is true, I believe, for the Maryland Theater, and the same would be true for Delegate Donahue, and I think that's all positive. Two other things. One, there over years and years, there's always this friction between the Fourth Estate and elected officials. It happens very frequently, and there have been few people who have been more outspoken about a deficit in the Herald Mail than I have been over the past years, including in this last election, saying it was going to be one of my primary jobs, and I never got it accomplished, but I have to compliment the Herald Mail for recognizing finally after many years that mail call as it existed was a detriment to our community. That call-ins are just fine and people can identify themselves. I know we've seen a letter that we received from a regular call-in to mail call, and now he gets to identify who he is, and that's fine, and I commend the Herald Mail for that. The last thing that I would mention is, it was something to get the email to see that Jim Bestpitch passed away. For many, as long as I can remember being on this council up until recently, Jim was a very vocal and responsible leader of the unions that he represented for the city of Hagerstown. And he was always a smile, and whether Jim was a problem or Jim wasn't a problem, you always really knew where he stood, and he was a good person. And I'm sorry to see that he's passed, and just wanted to comment on that. And that's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Nye.
I was going to say the same thing about Jim. He represented 1540 and 3373. Is that correct? Yeah, and that his services will be Thursday. There'll be 2 viewings, and then there'll be a service that evening. That's it.
Thanks. Don?
I would like to say that I think Councilman Metzner hit on many important things in his comments this evening. I would make the point that a man that we've recently worked with on legislation here in the city of Hagerstown, a private citizen, Bill Feuerstein, passed away. And he was a good man. I knew Bill for years and years and years, and he contributed a lot to individuals in this community and a lot to organizations in this community, and made it a better community. And he will be missed. And he was pretty darn young. He was only 64.
Thanks. My only comments are that I'm very excited about this process that we're undertaking with Urban Partners. The fact that there is a lot of stakeholder input that will be a part of it. Council, community, business owners, property owners, artists, students, business owners, you name it. We're going to find these people and get their input. Never again will people be able to say that they don't know what the vision is for downtown Hagerstown. And I think ultimately that's the goal for what we're undertaking here. So thank you all, and we will be adjourned.
Thank you, Mayor.